ves čas pri sebi, tudi popkovino so precej kasneje prirezali, tako da imam lep stik s sinovama, obema, medtem ko s prvo hčero se pa vidi, da so naju ločili in da je bil za njo problem. In da je bilo tudi za mene to velik problem. Tako da je zelo lepo, da so prisluhnili tudi v porodnišnicah v tem naravnemu sistemu druženja matere in novorojenčka. Tu zdaj ne more prihajati do tega, kot smo priče, da je bilo veliko otrok, ki so bili navidezno živi, potem kasneje proglašeni za mrtve, v bistvu je šlo pa za krajo otrok. O tem se je tudi zdaj ta teden sem imela priliko gledati na državnem zboru kot preiskovalna komisija, ko zaslišujejo matere, na kakšen način so izvedele, da so njihovi otroci mrtvi, niso jih smele niti videti, niso smele sodelovati pri pokopu. Skratka, vedeli so, da so se živi rodili, zdravi, potem pa naslednji dan v roku 24 ur pa so jim pač povedali, da so otroci umrli in da jih ne smejo videti. Tako da zdaj v bistvu to ni več možno, kar se jaz zelo veselim, ker to je zelo velika bolečina, če materi otroka na tak način odvzamejo, se še zlažejo, ali pa kasneje, tako kot sem jaz imela eno tako težko izkustvo, kasneje zelo namerno naklepno povzročijo kakšne možganske poškodbe z namenom odvzema organov. Tako da se v tej smeri veliko dobrega dogaja trenutno in jaz verjamem, da bo zmagala resnica in za vse te matere, baje jih je več kot 20.000 po letu nekje 1962 naprej, pa ne vem dokdaj se je množično dogajalo, da so otroke proglašali za mrtve in jih v bistvu prodajali ali za organe, ali za kri, ali pa za posvojitve. Tako da v bistvu se delajo veliki premiki, ker se oglašamo, ker je že zavest vseh nas mater malo bolj človeška, nismo več tako tihe in ne v vednosti. Tako da hvala tebi, Mihael, da boš danes to temo načel, ker se mi zdi zelo pomembna, ker najprej je otrok od matere in ni last države, ne last sistema in ima mati vse pravice odločati, kako, kje, kdaj, ali bo cepljen ali ne bo cepljen, kam gre v šolo ali gre v šolo. Mislim, da tukaj se zdaj čas vrti v pravo smer, v korist vseh otrok in vseh mater. No, toliko sem jaz zdaj.
Hvala lepa, ja, zaradi tega, ker to so podatki, ne. Ker pač mi moški tle nismo toliko zraven, nimamo teh informacij, dogaja pa se in država izkoristi, bom rekel, vsak najslabši možen trenutek, kadar je človek v težki situaciji ali pa v situaciji, ko pride, a veste, nekdo, ki ima podatke, kdaj kaj počne, kako počne, ga najlažje prizadene, zaradi tega, ker recimo, ko nas spremljajo, ne, na vseh možnih aparaturah, presluškujejo in tako naprej, nam najlažje podstavijo nogo takrat, ko je človek najbolj šibek. Ponavadi tako, ne.
Res je, čeprav jaz tukaj ne bi rekla, da je država kriva, tukaj so lobiji, tukaj so organizirane skupnosti in država kot država je mrtva, so pa določene skupine ljudi, ki se povežejo z namenom, predvsem finančnim namenom, ki potem našo nevednost, našo naivnost uporabijo za svoj žep oziroma za svoje cilje in svoje namene. Tako da tukaj jaz mislim, da je treba najti bolj osebno odgovornost, ker država kot država je mrtva in bolj, ko bomo govorili, bolj, ko se bomo ozaveščali, bolj, ko bomo govorili to, kar je resnica, manj bo ljudi, ki se bojo to upali delati. In jaz se tu zadnje čase res čutim zelo, nam rekla krivo, ampak nekje čutim, vsaj zdaj, ki sem poslušala te matere, ki so imeli resnično, je pač bila preiskovalna komisija in so zaslišali 3 matere in sem jih poslušala, sem dobila res še en dodaten izziv, da tudi jaz moram čim prej javno s knjigo ali kakorkoli drugače spregovoriti o mojem primeru, ker le s tem bomo preprečili, da bodo tudi drugi otroci imeli podobno usodo, če ne bomo resnice dali na svetlo. Trpeti v tišini in povedati samo najbližjim in trpeti, to ni rešitev. Rešitev je, ko poveš resnično na tak način, da celotna javnost sliši pravo resnico, tisto, kar jo mati pozna, oziroma dotični človek pozna, in šele to potem vodi do pravih rešitev in tudi do tega, da se tovrstne zlorabe, tovrstni zločini prenehajo delati. No, toliko sem te hotela majčkeno popraviti.
Zelo dobro, hvala.
Ker država kot država smo vsi ljudje in če rečeš država, tudi mene vključiš in vse nas.
Ja, seveda, zato ker, glej...
Treba je najti prave krivce in poklicati osebno odgovornost za tiste, ki so osebno odgovorni za določena dejanja.
Država je konstrukt, je pravni konstrukt in z davčno številko postaneš, ko to plačuješ davke, postaneš zavezan z državljan. Brez davčne številke pač nisi si samo fizična oseba kot oseba. Če glih rečejo fizična oseba in pravna oseba, je mišljeno pravna oseba kot podjetje, ki ima registriranih več ljudi, je kot pravna oseba, fizična oseba pa je lahko podjetje, kjer je pa lahko samo en zaposlen in ta eden tudi lahko zaposluje v tem smislu. Seveda je pa tudi v prenesenem pomenu. Okay,
hvala lepa za...
Miha, hvala, ker si tukaj sporočil in nam sem zapisal, kdaj si rojen, koliko si bil težek in kam si bil odpeljan po prvem dojenju in tako naprej, na opazovanje in tako naprej. Zanimivo, a veste, to so pač trenutki in takrat, namesto da bi tle malo počakali, ker otrok pa še res ne rabi takoj davčne in tudi potem bi lahko starši v miru sami to prijavili, ne da prihaja že direktno. Zelo skrbijo za to, da nas takoj popišejo, registrirajo, vzamejo, ne vem, kri otroku, mere, vse, kar je potrebno. Glejte, jaz sem tukaj pripravil en čist kratek video, 2 minute in boste videli, kaj pomeni matična številka, ki je strog oseben podatek. To se pravi matična številka, ki je sestavljena, evo bom jaz tukaj zdaj kar probal tale razdeliti, šerati naš zaslon, upam, da se vidi in bomo šli tule zdaj pogledati s tem filmčkom kratkim, evo, pa poslušamo.
Enotna matična številka občana ali EMŠO nam je dodeljena ob rojstvu in vsakdo ima svojo. Sestavljena je iz 13 števk. Prve 4 števke pomenijo datum, naslednje 3 pa letnico rojstva. Jošt, ki obiskuje 9. razred, je bil rojen leta 2008 in ne 2080 kot oseba C. Naslednji 2 števki sta za osebe rojene v Sloveniji 50. Druge kombinacije so bile rezervirane za druge jugoslovanske republike in za tujce. Oseba B je bila rojena v Črni Gori, torej to ni jošt. Naslednja števka predstavlja spol, 0 za moške, 5 za ženske. Oseba D je ženska, torej je joštov EMŠO A. Naslednji 2 števki pomenita zaporedno številko za osebe rojene istega dne, zadnja števka pa je kontrolna.
No tako, evo, zdaj veste, kako je, iz česa je sestavljena EMŠO, najprej rojstni podatek, potem imamo moški, ženska, potem v kateri državi in zadnje številke so tako imenovane kontrolne številke. To je gre strogo za osebni podatek. Zdaj, kjerkoli vas bodo spraševali za matično številko, veste, da želijo osebni podatek, ki pa ni nujno, da ga date. Veliko bolj prikladno je dati davčno številko, ker je javna številka in gre za javne finance in javno plačujemo davke, bruto, neto, povsod plačamo davke v trgovini, na pumpi, kamorkoli se obrneš, povsod je DDV. Ko dobiš pa domov list, je pa top secret, je pa vrhunska skrivnost. A veste, z davčno številko pravzaprav mi vzpostavimo pravni odnos z državo, takrat postanemo državljani. In kot državljani seveda nam kot fizičnim osebam pripadajo tudi pravice in nam seveda pripadajo tudi določene človekove pravice, take, ki pa jih pravni osebi ne pripadajo vse. O tem bomo malo kasneje govorili, ali pa če želite, bi zdaj za začetek povedal že kar. Zadeva je taka, da pri pravni osebi in fizični osebi je tako, da je v bistvu pravica do varstva poslovnih skrivnosti pri pravni osebi, pravica do zasebnosti je pa pri fizični osebi, če delimo pravice fizičnih oseb in pravnih oseb. Dalje, lahko si to tudi malo zapišete, ali pa če gremo naprej, pa vam to pokažem na slajdu. Čakajte, bomo šli skupaj skozi, zakaj pa ne? Dobro, gremo to skupaj skozi. Sem pripravil slajdek. Evo, upam, da ga vidite. No, in na levi strani imate fizično osebo, na desni strani pravno osebo. Fizični osebi pripada veliko več pravic, kakor pravni osebi. In ko pišete pritožbo, je zelo dobro vedeti, katere pravice so skupaj s pravno osebo in katerih pravic pa pravna oseba kot oblika pravne osebe, policija, tožilstvo, pravna pisarna nima. Imeli smo primer, ko je pravna pisarna na Ustavno sodišče vložila zahtevo za človekove pravice v Ustavi, in ker je to pravna oseba, se pravi, tam, kjer piše ni relevantno, se za te človekove pravice sploh ni mogla potegovati, in jasno, da je Ustavno sodišče potem te stvari skenslalo. Enako je tudi na sodišču ali pa na katerikoli drugi pritožbi. To se pravi, če se pritožujete za pravico do telesne in duševne integritete, tega pravna oseba nima. Če se pritožujete za pravico do osebne svobode in varnosti, super, ker tega pravna oseba nima. Če se pritožujete za pravico do svobode mišljenja, vesti in religije, krasno, pravna oseba tega ne more uveljavljati. In pravica do družinske in osebne integritete se lahko, se pravi, to uveljavljate kot fizična oseba z davčno številko, pravna oseba pa tega ne more. Naredite si print screen, pa tukaj vidite, da, gledajte, še enkrat, fizična oseba uživa pravice, ki so povezane z osebnim življenjem, telesno in duševno integriteto, svobodo, zasebnostjo ter drugimi družinskimi odnosi. To je to. Medtem ko pravna oseba ima tudi pravice in zdaj nam povsod, v glavnem pravne osebe nam vladajo in skrivajo človekove pravice na nek način, ne? Oziroma te človeške lastnosti, če bi jih le lahko, bi jih vse dali pravnim osebam, ne? Ampak gre pa v bistvu za biznis. Pri pravni osebi gre za poslovanje, zaščito poslovnih interesov, varstvo podatkov in poštenim obravnavanjem v poslovnih sporov, recimo da poštenim, ne? Vendar pravna oseba nima pravic, ki se nanašajo na zasebnost, telesno integriteto in družinske odnose in še kaj bi se našlo. No, toliko o tem, da boste razumeli, o čem bo tudi danes govor, in jaz bi potem kar šel. Glejte, jaz sem napisal Informacijskemu pooblaščencu Republike Slovenije na Zaloško cesto 59, Ljubljana, dopis, kjer sem se pridušal 15.9., to je 2 dni nazaj, sem po elektronski pošti vročil zadevo člen 30 Zakona o matičnem registru UPB2. Formalni predlog za oceno skladnosti z Ustavo, GDPR in Zakona o varstvu osebnih podatkov 2. In jedro vloge, ki sem ga vložil, je bil predlog v 3 točkah za Informacijskega pooblaščenca Republike Slovenije. Gremo te 3 točke, da boste potem vsebino in jedro razumeli skozi. Prvič, predlog ocene varstva osebnih podatkov. In sicer, takole sem zapisal, predlagam oceno skladnosti z varstvom osebnih podatkov. Matični urad obdeluje podatke o novorojenčkih brez soglasja staršev kar lahko krši Zakon o varstvu podatkov in GDPR, General Data Protection, se pravi Zakon o splošnem varstvu osebnih podatkov. To je zlasti zaskrbljujoče, glejte, za otroke, ki potrebujejo posebno varstvo podatkov. Pa ne samo podatkov, ampak tudi drugih stvari, ampak tukaj še posebej. Druga točka. Izpostavil sem zakonite interese in individualne pravice. To je to, kar smo zdajle govorili, ne? Podjetje, organizacije ali posamezniki lahko obdelujejo osebne podatke z zakonitim interesom. Kaj je zakoniti interes? Privolitev, osebna privolitev osebe, ki je lastnik ali lastnica osebnih podatkov. In tukaj sem zapisal, da mora biti to uravnoteženo z interesi in pravicami posameznika. Tega je vedno manj. Na internetu klikamo akcept, sprejemam, ne, vsi hočemo imeti nekaj, sprejemem in naši podatki v kukih kakorkoli grejo kar v vesolje. V primeru podatkov o otrocih veljajo bistveno strožje zahteve, pri čemer verjetno prevladujejo interesi otroka. In točko 3, ki sem jo izpostavil, javni organi in naloge v javnem interesu. Torej, javni organi ne morejo upravičiti obdelave osebnih podatkov na podlagi zakonitih interesov. Ja? Torej, zakon, ki zahteva podatke, ne more biti nad ustavo in rečejo, ja, to je zakon tako pravi in mi vaše podatke kar uporabljamo. Ja, seveda lahko, če sem jaz firma, potem lahko, če pa sem jaz fizična oseba, potem pa ne. Če se nekje prijavim kot podjetje, ne vem, Philips d.o.o., Mercator d.o.o., noben problem. Če se prijavim pa kot Mihael Belis, če se prijavim kot Dušan Murgel, če se prijavim kot Miha Berčič, če se prijavim kot Iveljana Belis, potem so pa zadeve povsem drugačne. V tem primeru morajo imeti pravno podlago za obdelavo osebnih podatkov, kot je opredeljena z Zakonom o javnih pooblastilih. In javna funkcija ni enakovredna zbiranju in upravljanju podatkov za tržne namene brez zakonitega interesa. Se pravi, javna funkcija, policist, redar, tudi če je to župan, tudi če je to ne vem kdo na kakšnih uradih, glejte, mora imeti zakoniti interes in ti moraš privoliti v to, ali pa svobodno greš in rečeš, rabim to in če hočeš dobiti, daš osebne podatke, daj pa jih kar tako tržijo, je pa to zanimiva zadeva. In potem sem lepo pozdravil informacijsko pooblaščenko, informacijskega pooblaščenca kot pravno osebo, seveda sem pisal, jaz sem to mogel pisati kot fizična oseba z vsemi pravicami. Kot Mihael Belis, ker če bi pisal kot pravna oseba, me sploh ne bi obravnaval. Jaz sem pisal to, se pravi, z vsemi temi atributi, ki pripadajo fizični osebi, ki smo jih prej v tabeli videli. In takole sem napisal. Za obdelavo osebnih podatkov novorojenčkov želim predložiti predlog za oceno skladnosti zakonodajo, ki se nanaša na obdelavo osebnih podatkov. Ugotovljeno je bilo, da matični urad brez ustrezne pravne podlage in brez privolitve staršev posreduje podatke novorojenčkov na Finančni urad Republike Slovenije, kar bi lahko predstavljalo kršitev Zakona o varstvu podatkov in pa General Data Protection. Tukaj sem potem seveda dal tudi razne inšpekcijske postopke, Zakon o varstvu osebnih podatkov, USTAVO sem potem navedel še razne linke, uredbo, parlament sveta, a ne, in tako naprej. Vendar, ne le v tem pogledu, otroci potrebujejo poleg vsega, kar sem zdaj navedel, se pravi zakonske podlage, tako posebno varstvo. Tudi in predvsem v zvezi s svojimi osebnimi podatki, ker se absolutno ne zavedajo zadevnih tveganj novorojenček, sploh ne otrok, ki zraste in dobi potem čez leta tudi mobitel v roke ali pa kaj še drugega, posledic in zaščitnih ukrepov in svojih pravic v zvezi z obdelavo osebnih podatkov. Tako posebno varstvo ali pa tako posebno varstvo bi moralo zadevati zlasti uporabo osebnih podatkov v namene trženja ali ustvarjanja osebnih in uporabniških profilov in zbiranje osebnih podatkov v zvezi z otroci pri uporabi storitev, ki se nudijo neposredno otrokom. Privolitev nosilca starševske odgovornosti ne bi smela biti v tem okviru storitev preventiva ali svetovanja, ki se nudijo neposredno otroku. Se pravi, mati je v bolnici, potem pridejo pa razne storitve, razne ponudbe za otroke in v okviru teh storitev ne bi smeli osebnih podatkov jemati, a ne z izgovorom, da pa če hočeš to storitev, moraš pa te podatke dati in ti ljudje potem to širijo naprej. Člen 6 uredbe Evropske unije v zakonitosti obdelave določa, da prvič, obdelava je zakonita le in kolikor je izpolnjen vsaj eden od navedenih pogojev v točkah od 1 do F, torej je več točk. Pri čemer je najpomembnejša zadnja točka F, ki določa, jo bom prebral oziroma citiral. Obdelava je potrebna zaradi zakonitih interesov, za katere si prizadeva upravljavec ali tretja oseba, razen kadar nad takimi interesi prevladajo interesi ali temeljne pravice in svoboščine posameznika, na katerega se nanašajo osebni podatki, ki zahtevajo varstvo osebnih podatkov zlasti, kadar je posameznik, na katerega se nanašajo osebni podatki, otrok. Zapleten stavek, jaz sem si ga mogel parkrat prebrati, izpisati, večpomensko obdelati, da sem to razumel. Torej, točka F prvega pododstavka se ne uporablja, tako v zakonu dalje piše, za obdelavo strani javnih organov pri upravljanju njihovih nalog. Prejšnji F sem prebral za komercialne namene, ampak strani javnih organov pri upravljanju njihovih nalog se pa to ne sme uporabljati. Pravkar navedeno izhaja iz člena 6.1f splošne uredbe o varstvu podatkov, ki določa, da je obdelava osebnih podatkov zakonita, če je potrebna zaradi zakonitih interesov, za katere si prizadeva upravljavec ali tretja oseba. Razen v primerih, ko imajo interesi ali temeljne pravice in svoboščine posameznika prednost. Okay? Še posebej pomembno je, ko gre za otroke, saj so otroci kot ranljiva skupina deležni višje stopnje varstva, posebej izpostavljam varstvo osebnih podatkov. Nadvse zaskrbljujoč in nacionalno škoden je namreč člen 30 Zakona o matičnem registru. ZMatR-UPB2, dobro poslušajte vsi, ki ste danes prisotni, kjer v prvem odstavku člena piše. In sedaj bom citiral ta kritičen zakon, na katerega sem napisal predlog revizije, predlog pregleda informacijskemu pooblaščencu. Citiram. Pristojni organ, pri katerem je posameznik vpisan v matični register, posreduje osebne podatke iz matičnega registra uporabnikom, ki jih potrebujejo za vzdrževanje registrov in evidenc iz svojega delovnega področja, če so za pridobitev teh podatkov pooblaščeni z zakonom. To pomeni, matični register je pridobil podatke. Obnaša se kot lastnik, skrben varuh, ki jih ne da nikomur drugemu, razen tistemu, ki je z zakonom pooblaščen. Vprašam vas, kje pa je vmes lastnik osebnih podatkov? Otrok, mati, oče, družinski podatki, ki so dani v matični register? Kje je pisno privoljenje? Kje je ustno dovoljenje? Kje se je pojavilo vprašanje, da sme, glede na ustavne določbe, glede na ustavno določilo 38. člena, ustave, širiti podatke po zakonu za fizično osebo, ki pripada pravica, da brez dovoljenja in brez namena, za katerega so bili zbrani, se ne sme širiti sploh iz ustanove ven. In tukaj matični register potem pošilja podatke marsikam, ne samo na davčni urad. Jaz sem dalje potem zapisal tako, zdaj razčistimo nekatere ključne točke. Prvič, zakoniti interesi upravljavca ali tretje osebe. To pomeni, da lahko podjetja, organizacije ali posamezniki, upravljavci podatkov, ki imajo te registre, obdelujejo osebne podatke, če imajo za to zakoniti interes, ki ni nujno povezan z izrecnim soglasjem posameznika. Takšen interes je lahko čisto poslovne, komercialne narave, na primer trženje izdelkov, karkoli, ali v zvezi z varstvom sistema. Na primer, preprečevanje goljufij. Vendar mora biti to upravičeno iz stališča zakonitosti. Pa ni. Drugič, prevlada interesov posameznika, interesi in temeljne pravice posameznika, na katere se podatki nanašajo, imajo, prednost pred interesi upravljavca ali tretje osebe. Če posameznik meni, da so njegovi podatki obdelani na način, ki škoduje njegovim interesom ali krši njegove pravice, na primer pravico do zasebnosti, kar se je v tem primeru zagotovo zgodilo, ker je to poseg v družino, to je odhod osebnih podatkov v neko ustanovo, ki potem to širi dalje, se mora taka obdelava nujno prekiniti. In to moramo državljani zahtevati sami, ker če tega ne bomo na glas povedali, če tega ne bomo zahtevali, bodo na koncu od nas zahtevali še marsikaj drugega. To ravnovesje med interesi upravljavca in pravicami posameznika je ključno. Tretja točka, poseben poudarek na varstvu otrok. Kadar so v obdelavo osebnih podatkov vključeni otroci, zakonodaja postavlja še strožje zahteve. Otroci veljajo za bolj ranljive, ne razumejo teh posledic svojih podatkov, zato je potrebna zelo visoka raven varstva. Če torej obdelava vključuje podatke otrok, so interesi otrok zelo verjetno najpomembnejši in veliko bolj pomembni od interesov upravljavca, tudi če je to v skladu z zakonom. Točka 4. Zdaj smo pa pri javnih organih in naloge javnega interesa. Točko, ki sem jo prej navedel, iz GDPR, splošna uredba o varstvu podatkov, se ne uporablja za javne organe, kadar javni organi upravljajo svoje naloge, ki so določene z zakonom, ali izvajajo pooblastila javnega prava. To pomeni, da javni organi, kot so na primer, dobro poslušajte, davčna uprava, socialne službe, statistični urad, inšpekcijske službe, zdravstvene ustanove, policija, redarstvo, občine, šole, ne morejo upravljati in opravičevati obdelave podatkov z zakonitimi interesi. To lahko še enkrat preberem, ponovim, lahko grem pa naprej. Če ste razumeli, ne morejo upravičevati obdelave podatkov z zakonitimi interesi. Namesto tega morajo imeti pravno podlago, da lahko uvedejo zakoniti interes. Pravno podlago za obdelavo. Na primer, zakon, ki zahteva obdelavo za opravljanje njihove javne funkcije. Javna funkcija, kot je služba v javni upravi ali drugi javni položaj, sama po sebi ne pomeni, da je zbiranje in obdelava podatkov zakonita. Zakonitost zbiranja podatkov je odvisna, dobro poslušajte, od namena, za katerega se podatki zbirajo in uporabljajo. Na primer, zbiranje podatkov za tržne namene, kot je oglaševanje, oglaševalske kampanje ali uporaba podatkov za prisilno vzpostavljanje nasilnih stikov, da bi povzročili strah ali pritisk, ni dovoljena brez ustrezne pravne podlage in soglasja. Veste, kdaj so pritiski? Veste, kdaj se to izsiljuje? Vsi to vemo. Kaj to pomeni v praksi? Točka 5. Torej, če javni organ, na primer FURS, obdeluje podatke novorojenčkov, tega ne more storiti na podlagi zakonitih interesov, ampak mora imeti za to izrecno pravno podlago, ki je pa nima, ne? Kot zakon, ki mu to dovoljuje. V tem primeru se zakoniti interesi kot pravni temelj in podlaga po uradni dolžnosti ne uporabljajo, saj gre za javni organ pri opravljanju svojih nalog. Torej, v 30. členu Matičnega registra je tudi stavek, kjer piše, da uslužbenec, ki ima pooblastila, vpiše po uradni dolžnosti. Čakajte malo. Dajmo se vprašati, kje pa je zdaj pravna podlaga, kaj pa je to uradna dolžnost. To je spet en konstrukt, kjer se upraviči uradna dolžnost in on zdaj lahko dela kar če. Ne sme in ne more. Ker gre za javni organ pri upravljanju svojih nalog. In ko ima svoje naloge, ne more uradne dolžnosti opravičevati brez pojasnil. Ne more se sam sklicevati po uradni dolžnosti. Točka F se torej nanaša predvsem na zasebne subjekte, na fizične osebe, medtem ko se za javne organe uporabljajo povsem druge pravne podlage. A veste, po uradni dolžnosti se uporablja za zakon za upravne organe, ne za fizične osebe. Ne? Nekdo mora po uradni dolžnosti narediti kazensko ovadbo uradne osebe, ker je naredila prekršek ta pa ta, prekršila zakon, kaznivo dejanje in tako naprej. Pravne podlage za obdelavo osebnih podatkov, kot so zakonodajne zahteve, ki opredeljujejo njihovo delo, je v tem pogledu zelo vprašljivo. Glede na to, da novorojenčki ob rojstvu še ne potrebujejo davčne številke in da se njihovi osebni podatki že obdelujejo, in to brez ustrezne privolitve, da ne govorimo otroka, ki itak še ne zna in ne more govoriti, brez privolitve očeta, brez privolitve matere, brez privolitve staršev kot takih, menim, da je potrebna stroga, striktna in natančna revizija trenutne slovenske, nadvse čudne in samovoljne prakse. Posebej nas zanima, ali je obdelava podatkov skladna v tem specifičnem primeru s členom 38 iz Ustave in z ostalimi predpisi, ki se nanašajo na varstvo osebnih podatkov. Tudi nas zanima, kako matični urad in Ministrstvo za notranje zadeve posredujeta podatke Statističnemu uradu Republike Slovenije, naše osebne podatke. Kakšna je oblika posredovanja? Kakšna je zaščita osebnih podatkov na Statističnem uradu ter kako se ti podatki obdelujejo, vključno z obdelavo izven Slovenije, kot je na primer pošiljanje podatkov v obdelavo tujemu specializiranemu podjetju v EU in to podjetje kasneje obdelane podatke posreduje naprej Eurostatu. Torej, Slovenija namreč sodeluje z različnimi podjetji po vsej Evropski uniji za obdelavo osebnih podatkov. V skladu z uredbo GDPR. Zmeri rečejo, da je to v skladu, da oni varujejo podatke, da je vse v redu. Ampak, ne, zanimivo, ena izmed znanih držav, kamor Slovenija pošilja podatke, v obdelavo je Švedska, ki ima napredne zmogljivosti za posebne obdelave podatkov in je priljubljena destinacija za zunanje izvajanje, shranjevanja in obdelave osebnih podatkov znotraj Evropske unije. Tudi mnoge druge države tja pošiljajo. Na primer, nekatere slovenske organizacije lahko v tem pogledu sodelujejo s švedskimi podjetji, ki so specializirana za varno oblačno računalništvo ali pa za delovanje podatkov v oblaku in obdelavo podatkov v skladu, samo napišejo v skladu s pravili EU. V skladu s zakonom, v skladu s pravili EU, potem ga pa vprašaš uradnika en zakon in ne ve. Ampak vse je v skladu, vedno je vse v skladu. Ker so jim pravniki sestavljeni, ti stoji na papirju, oni pa delajo, kakor se jim zljubi. Vedno je tako, kar vse po domače. Vem iz prve roke. Torej, obdelani podatki se pogosto vrnejo v Slovenijo ali pa se nadalje posredujejo drugim državam EU, odvisno od specifičnih, poslušajte, političnih dogovorov in morda nekaterih pravnih okvirov, ki urejajo obdelavo podatkov. Ti mednarodni prenosi morajo biti v skladu z uredbo GDPR, pa niso, ker so politični. Morali pa bi biti z GDPR, da se zagotovi zaščita in zakonita obdelava osebnih podatkov, vključno z mehanizmi, kot so standardne pogodbene klavzule, SCC, ki varujejo takšne prenose, potem GDPR Community, ki to obdeluje, varuje, in pa GDPR Hub, kjer se dobivajo strokovnjaki, ki rešujejo probleme, kadar podatki uhajajo, kar pa ni redko. Torej, navedeno je neizpodbitni dokaz, da se osebni podatki brez pravnega interesa in brez ustrezne zakonske podlage pridobijo, postanejo večno neizbrisni. Najprej ga brez zakona, brez konsenza staršev pridobijo in ti podatki postanejo večni, ker takoj grejo na vse možne variante. Grejo takoj v socialno službo, grejo takoj na davčni urad, grejo takoj Ministrstvo za notranje zadeve in potem na statistični urad iz statističnega urada izven naše države in tako je vse življenje si potem kar tam v oblaku in sploh ne veš. Širijo se po vsej upravni Evropi, brez soglasja lastnika, ko vmes poseže upravni organ. To velja še posebej za podatke otrok in njihovih staršev, ki zaradi takega zakonitega razširjanja popolnoma izgubijo nadzor nad svojimi osebnimi podatki. Ne samo otroci, tudi starši. Pa še kdo. Matični register, ki po 30. členu omogoča tovrstno obdelavo, prvič ni ustrezno urejen in drugič sploh nima pravne podlage za tako široko širjenje osebnih podatkov, kar predstavlja resno kršitev temeljnih človekovih pravic. Ker ne gre za podatke firme, ampak za podatke fizične osebe, novorojenca, otroka, živo osebo, ki bi moral biti na take zlorabe izjemno pozoren kot zakonodajalec. Odgovornih organov, niti zakonodajalca oziroma arbitra, ki dopušča izvrševanje tovrstnega širjenja osebnih podatkov po uradni dolžnosti brez pravne podlage, na kršitve ne opozarja dovolj učinkovito, niti se upravne tržne prakse medijsko ne obelodanijo. Zakaj je temu tako? Zato, ker nihče od nas ne opozarja, ker se nihče od nas s tem ne ukvarja. Prepozno smo postali pozorni, da so naši podatki trenutno najdragocenejše zlato. Veliko bolj so dragoceni za podjetja in državo in za izvajanje nadzora, kot denar, kot zlato, kot karkoli. Zakaj? Ker če pridemo enkrat do socialnih točk, so podatki tisti, ki nam bodo krojili življenje. Ne več fizični denar. Torej, državljani smo tisti, ki moramo sami skrbeti za zaščito svojih podatkov. Čeprav informacijskega pooblaščenca plačujemo z davki, za upravljanje točno te naloge. To je nespremenljivo in nesprejemljivo in zahteva takojšnje ukrepanje. Saj gre za temeljne pravice posameznika, ki je zaradi nedoslednosti zakonodaje in pomanjkanja nadzora vse bolj ogrožen. Vsak dan in vse bolj. Jaz sem pripravil potem dalje, po tej utemeljitvi, seznam ključnih ukrepov in vidikov, ki jih predlagam za izvedbo analize skladnosti z zakonodajo pri informacijskem pooblaščencu, in sicer sem navedel sledeče. Prvič sem navedel pravni vidik. Točka A. Obstoječe politike in postopki, ki jih morajo preveriti, ali imajo prijavljene organizacije iz tega predloga sprejete sploh varnostne politike, pravilnike, interne akte in ustrezno zaščito osebnih podatkov. In sem zapisal, da zahtevam pojasnilo, ali so te politike ustrezno posodobljene in ali vključujejo vse zahteve GDPR in ZVOP-2. Točka B. Predlagal sem zbiranje in obdelavo podatkov, da je treba analizirati na način zbiranja podatkov, vrste podatkov, ki se zbirajo, in zraven napisano pravno podlago, o kateri smo prej govorili, ne na podlagi zakona, ampak zakon mora imeti pravno podlago za njihovo obdelavo. Preveriti, ali so privolitve posameznikov ustrezno pridobljene in dokumentirane. To pomeni, ali je zvočni posnetek osebe, ki to da, da ga imajo shranjenega, da je pisni posnetek, da je izjava, da je potrdilo, da je karkoli. Da je dovoljenje, recimo high-tech podjetja pa spletne strani I accept, ok, imajo, ne? Ampak to, kar država počne, država pa nima I accept, ne? Ima pa malo problem, ker ni softversko, zato so pogruntali, da je fajn to, kar ima high-tech, da to vedno sprejmeš. Moramo paziti, kaj sprejemamo. Ok, točka C, dostop do podatkov. Preučiti, kdo ima sploh do teh podatkov dostop, do osebnih podatkov in kako so dostopni, nadzorovani in omejeni. Zadnjič mi je prišlo na misel, recimo, da imam med 350 ljudmi, ki so zaposleni na uradu za statistiko, enega prijatelja, ki ima tam dostop pač do enih ključnih podatkov, ker je gor vse. Gor so vsi podatki zbrani, bančni podatki, tržni podatki, sodni podatki, občinski podatki, šolski podatki, you name it, telekomovi podatki. In seveda, moj prijatelj, a ne, s kakšno kuvertico, kosilcem, malo tako, nasmehom, a ne, lahko pridem do podatkov nekoga, ki ga pa zelo spoštujem in ljubim in mu ne želim nič hudega, ampak jaz bi rad imel njegove podatke. Kaj se zgodi v takem primeru? No? Kako so taki v času covida? Delo od doma, ja, ljubi Bog. Vsi ti ljudje so delali od doma in za hrbtom ti je prišel kdorkoli, prijatelj ti je prišel domov, sosed je lahko gledal, mož, žena ti je čez hrbet lahko gledal bančne podatke, osebne podatke, mogoče so se še celo kaj norco delali, kakorkoli že, skratka, nobene odgovornosti. Ne? Ste se malo zamislili zdajle? In jaz sem tukaj zahteval, da je potrebno pojasniti, razjasniti, kako se obdelujejo podatki ranljivih skupin in posebne vrste osebnih podatkov. Točka D, usklajenost z zakoni. Pri vseh upravljavcih osebnih podatkov skladno z določili ZVOP2, še posebej glede posredovanja podatkov med različnimi organi. Torej, Sloveniji in pošiljanje podatkov znotraj EU. Vsi naši podatki potujejo nekam. Razmišljal sem, kako lahko statistični urad ve, koliko je metk, koliko je jožic, koliko priimkov je Belis, koliko priimkov je, ne vem, Trajkovič, koliko priimkov je Murgel, koliko priimkov je, ne vem, Leskovec. Kako statistični urad ve za vse te priimke? Kdaj je bil, ob katerem datumu, koliko je bilo januarja rojenih, koliko je bilo februarja, koliko je bilo ob tisti uri rojenih? Kako statistični urad to ve, če dobi anonimizirane podatke? Veste, kaj je anonimiziran podatek? Podatek, ki je tako povezan, da ga ne moreš z osebo povezati. Ne? Oni pa to vse dobijo. Kje kupuješ, kaj kupuješ. Skratka, Sloveniji in Evropski uniji, ko se pošiljajo podatki, gre za preveriti nujno morebitne postopke prenosa podatkov, ki pa so lahko v nasprotju z zakonodajo. Ne trdim, ampak sumim. Točka E, nadzor zunanjih izvajalcev. Mnogo je zunanjih izvajalcev, zunanjih podjetij, kjer država da zunanjim izvajalcem, pa še marsikdo drug. In je treba tukaj zdaj analizirati, kako organizacija nadzoruje delo zunanjih izvajalcev, ki obdelujejo naše osebne podatke. In ali so sklenjene sploh med temi ustanovami ustrezne pogodbene obveznosti, klauzule, v primeru kršitev globe in drugi elementi, odgovorne zaščite v skladu z GDPR. Vse to bi mogel imeti informacijski pooblaščenec, dragi moj, nenehno napoti in nenehno ukrepati, ker se stvari vsak dan spreminjajo, vsak dan so novosti. Posebej v IT vidikih. In tukaj sem jaz nekaj, glede na to, da se ukvarjam tudi z IT tehnologijo, od leta 85 imam računalnik, tako da nekaj o teh stvarih vem. Ne vem vsega, vem pa ravno dovolj, da lahko te stvari vidim in da lahko te stvari primerno, ustrezno izpostavim. A. Tehnična zaščita. Preveriti učinkovitost zaščitnih ukrepov, kot so požarne pregrade, požarni zid rečemo, firewall, sistemi za preprečevanje vdora, protivirusna zaščita in sistemi za varnostno kopiranje. B. Kriptiranje podatkov. Ne more biti podatek kar v računalniku, če ni kriptiran, mora biti posebna zaščita. In da hočeš podatek odkriptirati, moraš imeti password in samo ti dostop. Potrebno je analizirati kriptiranje za zaščito osebnih podatkov in preveriti, ali so podatkovne zbirke ustrezno zaščitene pred nepooblaščenim dostopom. C. Avtentikacija in dostopi do sistemov. IP mora pregledati načine avtentikacije v vseh teh organizacijah pri uporabi in kontroliranje dostopa do sistemov in preveriti varnostne postopke za prijavo v sisteme in dostop do podatkov. Točka D. Kakšni so postopki za odkrivanje vdorov? Za krajo osebnih podatkov, ko vemo, kaj se dogaja. Se slišimo, beremo. Predlagal sem, da analizirajo, ali so vzpostavljeni postopki za odkrivanje in primerno hitro odzivanje na vdore v sistem. V točki E me zanima, kako uničujejo podatkovne nosilce, ko menjujejo stare računalnike za nove, potem pa hardware, diske in tako naprej. Kako to uničujejo, na kak način in kje to pristane. Preveriti postopke za fizično uničevanje podatkovnih nosilcev in ravnanje z njimi v skladu z varnostnimi zahtevami. Nekdo tukaj piše, pozdravljeni, ali lahko zahtevam, da se vsi moji podatki umaknejo iz vseh omrežij. Branko. Ne vem, kam bi to lahko pisal, zaradi tega, ker je to omrežje, tudi če del interneta pade, ga še vedno del deluje. Ne vem, torej mislim, da enkrat, ko si v sistemu, da je to nemogoče. To je moje osebno mnenje. Seveda pa ne vem, kje je zgornja domena za svetovno, če hočeš iz vseh omrežij, se pravi zahtevati ne. Lahko v Google pišeš, da omeji tvoje prikaze. Obstaja obrazec, obstaja formular. To je že ena velika stvar. Veliko je ljudi, ki pišejo, poiščejo, kako naj se izpišejo iz Googla, ker ko nismo bili v tej zavesti kot danes, je Evropska unija pač naredila GDPR in takrat je Google mogel ponuditi to možnost, da ti napišeš, da ne želiš, da se tvoji zadetki, če napišejo, ne vem, tvojo hišno številko, tvoje ime, priimek, tako da se več ne pokažeš v Google, da te ni, izgineš. Ampak še zmeraj si v drugih omrežjih, v drugih iskalnikih, v drugih bazah, v backupih, ko si enkrat not, je pravzaprav nemogoče priti ven. Da se pa vsaj na prvi pogled. Tako da, Branko, probaj, bom rekel, pisati, vprašati. Imamo pa to pravico po GDPR data, seveda so posebni formularji, kjer pa lahko zahtevamo najprej izpis in to iz vsake državne ustanove. Povsod ne radi dajo, ker imajo preveč in ne radi dajo zaradi tega, ker potem pogruntaš, da so goljufali. Da zahtevaš izpis, da zahtevaš izbris in da zahtevaš pozabo osebnih podatkov. To je pravica za osebne podatke. Firma tega ne more narediti, lahko pa fizična oseba to zahteva. In moj predlog je, da se to naredi na čim večjih koncih. Naprimer, če ste zamenjali banko, lahko pri prejšnji banki po določenem času, ali ne vem kako, so pogodbe narejene, zahtevate najprej izpis, kaj imajo še v vas, izbris in absolutno pozabo. In ta ustanova nikoli več brez vašega dovoljenja teh podatkov ne sme niti uporabljati, niti pregledovati, ampak jih mora uničiti in pozabiti. Enako je, če pišete ne samo na občino, če pišete recimo v šolo, ki ste jo zaključili, da tam pozabijo vas in vaše podatke, da ste to šolo recimo naredili. Ne? Ali pa za pravosodje, vse veste. Nekdo, ki je bil zaprt v zaporu, je po 2 letih, se morajo podatki brisati, da te cel življenje ne spremlja, to zato, ker ljudje imajo to obsodilni namen. Pa razna mnenja se potem širijo. In tako naprej, in tako naprej. Zanimivo bi bilo pisati časopisne hiše, a ne, da zahtevate izbris člankov, najprej izpiska imajo tam v vas, potem pa izbris in pozabo, da zginete iz interneta, recimo dol. Ne. Zdaj, kako se to ravna v skladu z varnostnimi zahtevami, sem dal v bistvu tudi jaz zahtevo. In pa gledajte, oblačne storitve in elektronska pošta. V točki F sem predlagal, da informacijski pooblaščenec preveri varnost oblačnih storitev, se pravi podatkov v oblaku, ki niso nam dostopni in so nekje na nekem serverju, v neki bazi podatkov, v nekem registru, ki se uporablja za shranjevanje osebnih podatkov ter varnostno obdelavo osebnih podatkov pri pošiljanju po elektronski pošti. Namreč tudi elektronska pošta se prestreza in ko gre za osebne podatke, ko gre za obdelavo podatkov med ustanovami, je informacijski pooblaščenec tisti, ki ima vso pravico to pregledati. Je pa zanimivo pri tej zadevi, da taki ljudje, ki so tam, to morajo biti najboljši kadri. Najprej mora poznati izjemno dobro zahteven zakon, pa ne samo enega, ampak več. Se pravi, vse ustave v Evropski uniji, mora poznati vse zakone v Evropski uniji, ki so lokalno postavljeni, General Data Protection, poleg tega pa kompletno IT tehnologijo. Vsaka čast človeku enemu, ki se na vse to spozna, a ne? To je, kar sem predlagal IT. Predlagani ukrepi v naslednji točki za informacijskega pooblaščenca. Pregled in posodobitev politike varstva osebnih podatkov in priporočam revizijo in posodobitev varnostnih politik in postopkov v skladu z ugotovitvami te analize. B. Izboljšanje postopkov obdelave podatkov. Predlagal sem uvedbo jasnih smernic za obdelavo osebnih podatkov, vključno z dokumentiranjem pisnih osebnih privolitev in obvladovanjem dostopa do osebnih podatkov. Po točko C, glejte, v vsakem podjetju vsak dan prihaja do nadgradnje internet tehnologij sistemov. Priporočal sem nadgradnjo varnostnih ukrepov IT sistemov, vključno z izboljšanjem zaščite, avtentikacije in postopkov za odkrivanje vdorov. Usposabljanje zaposlenih je najbolj pomembno, to je ključno. In priporočam pooblaščencu izvajanje usposabljanja za zaposlene o varstvu zasebnih podatkov in internetne varnosti. Povedal vam bom, tukaj sem ostal pri točki D, bom malo prekinil, povedal vam bom svojo izkušnjo, ko se je zgodila pri nas v društvu, točno veste, da so prišli, so vdrli tle policisti noter nezakonito in so odnesli računalnike, diske, ne vem, doma so vse odnesli, telefone so nam odnesli, v času covida se je to dogajalo, ko je bil Janša na oblasti, ko so tolkli po vseh človekovih pravicah, ko so odnesli orodja, da se nisem mogel preživljati. Predstavljajte si, 30-40 let delam z računalnikom. Vse imam računalniško, ne. Nimaš telefona, nimaš simke, nimaš računalnika, nimaš nič, ker so vse odnesli. S kakšno pravico, ne vem. Nezakonit je bil sodna odredba, z Novega mesta so tle v Ljubljano vdrli, ker sploh ne bi smeli. Ampak to so neizobraženi policisti, oni dobijo nalogo, naredijo, briga njih, pa se ti pridušajo, koliko se češ. Še danes po 2 letih in pol, po slabih 3 letih, niso vrnili nič. Predstavljajte si, kako zdaj jaz lahko v naslednjih 48 urah naredim Zoom za celotno društvo in vmes plačam še vse račune v podjetje, ki nimam v Sloveniji in sem operativen kompletno računalniško in mobilno in vse v 48 urah postaviti nazaj. Ali bi vi to znali? Govorim o tovrstnem izobraževanju. Mene so prišli strokovnjaki, sem spraševati, kako sem to naredil. Sem rekel, veste kaj, vi to poučujete, dajte vi meni povedati, kako sem naredil, kam jaz to vam razlagal, jaz sem to naredil, jaz to znam, ne? In sem to naredil. Ja. Na božični predvečer so prišli tole narediti, mi smo imeli pa 25. se pravi 23. zvečer so to naredili, mi smo pa imeli 25. Zoom in je bilo vse normalno. Kompletni sistem je vse postavljen nazaj. Ne se čuditi, ker marsikdo se je čudil, zato ker ko ti vzamejo telefon in SIM, in ne samo tebi, 2 in tudi ženi in vse doma poberejo in ti nimaš nič več. Če telefon zgubite, ste kabosi, pa je samo telefon. Tukaj je šlo pa za 3 računalnike, pa za 4 telefone. Vse. Tako da, evo, nekaj vemo o teh stvarih, zato tudi mislim, da imam pravico to tudi kaj povedati in zahtevati, ker se obnašajo oblastniki, zakonodajalci, kot da je zakon nad vsem, pa ni res. Se pravi, usposabljanje zaposlenih je nujno in priporočam usposabljanje za zaposlene v varstvu osebnih podatkov in IT varnosti skupaj. Točka E, revizija zunanjih pogodb. To, kar smo prej rekli, ampak preveriti in, kjer je potrebno, nadgraditi pogodbe z zunanjimi izvajalci, ki obdelujejo osebne podatke slovenskih državljanov. Jaz sem to naredil ne samo za otroke, ampak sem naredil za en primer, tipičen primer, ki je ključen, kjer skozi luknjo zakona jemljejo osebno podatek. Jaz dvomim, da se bo IP tega sploh lotil. Odgovora nisem še dobil, vem pa nekaj, da sem jih fajn brcnil. In vem nekaj, da tudi zdaj, ko javno govorim, da bo marsikdo to slišal, poslušal in bo marsikaj tudi razmišljal drugače. Zaradi tega, ker mi, državljani, ki smo prvič zahtevamo, če se nam nekaj obljub in mi to plačujemo zakonodajalca in ljudje, ki so tam v stolčkih, ki obdelujejo osebne podatke slovenskih državljanov tako malomarno in si jih podajajo tako malomarno in jih širijo po celi Evropski uniji, v cel kozmos, zahtevamo, da se to potem počne na nek način, kjer bomo zaščiteni. Razmislek o skladnosti zakona o matičnem registru z Ustavo Republike Slovenije in GDPR je torej nujno. Zato sem tukaj predlagal ustavno skladnost. Torej, člen 30 zakona o matičnem registru, to je ZMatR-UPB2, določa, da matični organ lahko posreduje osebne podatke uporabnikom, ki jih potrebujejo za vzdrževanje registrov, evidenc, če so ti uporabniki za pridobitev teh podatkov pooblaščeni z zakonom. To smo v uvodu povedali. Če so pooblaščeni z zakonom, potem matični urad da podatke, brez da vpraša lastnika, od katerega je podatek dobil. Vidite, tle je ta preskok, ne? Zakonito. Ampak zakonito še ne pomeni, da je ustavno in zakonito nikakor ne, ker zakon obravnava pravne osebe in povedali smo, da pravna oseba nima pravice do telesne duševne integritete, ker je nima. Pravna oseba pravice do osebnosti, svobode in varnosti nima. Pravna oseba pravice do svobode mišljenja, vesti in religije nima. In pravna oseba pravice do družinske in osebne integritete in varnosti nima. Imajo pa druge pravice. Ampak če bi oni si jo tudi te vzamejo in potem nas obravnavajo kot, veste, kaj bom rekel, eno grdo besedo, ne? Kot ene pimpeke, ki pojma nimamo, kot da nič ne vemo in to se češ, ne? Z zakonom. To pa po uradni dolžnosti. Groza. Glejte, pri tem, kaj se dogaja, ne omenjajo zahteve po pridobitvi privolitve. To kar preskočijo. Posameznik tle ni pomemben, ker je zakon bolj pomemben, pa ni res. Zakaj pa je postal bolj pomemben? Zato, ker se nihče od nas ni zavedal tega, ni zahteval tega in nikoli ni vstopil v luft zaradi tega. Prav? In tukaj pripeljemo vso zadevo do vprašanja skladnosti tega 30. člena, Zakona o matičnem registru, kam, k členu 38, ki nepopustljivo na podlagi 15. ustavnega člena Slovenije te pravice ščiti, kot tudi naroča uradnikom po 120. členu Ustave Republike Slovenije, namreč, da upravni organi opravljajo svoje delo samo in v okviru in na podlagi ustave in zakonov. Člen 15 iz Ustave Republike Slovenije zagotavlja pravico do varstva osebnih podatkov in določa, da lahko država omeji te pravice samo takrat in samo v primerih, ki so določeni z zakonom in če so te omejitve nujne v demokratični družbi. Pomeni, morajo biti izredne razmere, izredne stanje, mora biti zakon, ne vem, nad ustavo, da bi lahko brez tvojega dovoljenja jemali podatke. In mora biti zakon za podjetje, za pravno osebo, da to lahko storijo. Ne more pa biti zakon postavljen tako, da je nad nami ljudmi, nad ljudstvom, nad fizično osebo, ki ima davčno številko in plačuje davek za te ljudi, in s tem imamo mi pravni odnos z ustavo in z državo, in mi jo plačujemo, vzdržujemo, in dajmo si to enkrat v zavest, da ne reči, ja, se plačujemo davke, kaj boš ti? Ne, ni res. Ti vzpostaviš pravni odnos, reden pravni odnos, s tem, ko plačaš državne uradnike, da spoštujejo ustavo, tvoje človekove pravice, ki so nad pravicami pravnih oseb, firm, korporacij in nad policija DOO, socialna DOO, banka DOO, LTD, SP, karkoli že. Veste, koliko več pravic imamo posamezniki. Če pa se ti pritožiš kot Mihajl SP, pa kar pozabi na človekove pravice, ker si se pritožil kot pravna oseba. Takrat človekovih pravic ne moreš doseči. Če se pritožiš pa kot Mihajl Belis, napišeš davčno številko naslov, pa mogoče greš na davčni urad po izpis davčne številke še kopijo zraven, takrat se pa stvari začnejo, veste, precej drugače premikati. Zato, ker ko jim pokažeš, potem gledajo stvari malo drugače, ker je to uradni dokaz, uradni dokument. Včasih je dobro še kakšno stvar tudi k notarju iti, da notar potrdi, pa dati 12 € ali pa nekaj takega. To, da so te stvari dobijo svojo formo, vsebino in da damo točno vedeti, kdo smo, kaj smo in da se tega zavedamo. Kadar zakonodaja omogoča obdelavo osebnih podatkov brez izrecne privolitve posameznika v takem primeru in brez pravne podlage, to pomeni najhujšo kršitev te ustavne določbe, še posebej, če obravnava osebnih podatkov ni nujna ali pa ne izpolnjuje strogih pogojev za omejitev pravic. Če torej zakon, kot je Zakon o matičnem registru, omogoča obdelavo osebnih podatkov brez privolitev posameznika in brez pravne podlage, to pomeni, da sporni zakon ne spoštuje minimalne osnovne zahteve po ustavni skladnosti. S tem sem zaključil pri informacijskem pooblaščencu pravni nasvet. Potem sem izpostavil drugo točko, ko govorijo, da je to skladno z zakonom in GDPR. Ok, sem rekel, pa gremo gledati. Točka 2, skladno z GDPR in ZVOP2. Generalni zakonodajni okvir za varstvo osebnih podatkov v Evropski uniji je splošna uredba o varstvu osebnih podatkov, ki zahteva, dobro poslušajte, da mora biti obdelava osebnih podatkov zakonita, poštena, pregledna. GDPR zahteva pridobitev privolitve posameznika ali pa morajo imeti drugo zakonito podlago za obdelavo osebnih podatkov. Če zakon o matičnem registru ne vključuje jasnih zahtev za pridobitev privolitve ali ustrezne pravne podlage, to pomeni jasno, transparentno kršitev GDPR. Gremo pogledati v Zakon o varstvu osebnih podatkov ZVOP2. Prav tako zahteva, da mora biti obdelava osebnih podatkov v skladu z načeli zakonitosti, poštenosti in preglednosti, ker ta ZVOP2 mora biti v skladu z GDPR in z ustavo. Dalje, če matični organi zdaj v tej fazi, ki to vemo, in drugi registri v Republiki Sloveniji, uporabniki podatkov, ne upoštevajo teh načel, je treba sprejeti ukrepe in izboljšanje skladnosti za zakonodajo ali pa ozavestiti uradnike, da bodo to znali, vedeli in upoštevali v praksi. In sedaj, v upanju, da bo predlog za oceno skladnosti in zakonodajo v pomoč pri zagotavljanju ustrezne zaščite osebnih podatkov, vas lepo in prijazno pozdravljam. S spoštovanjem, Mihael Belis. To je to, kar sem jaz napisal. Upam, da bo prišlo nazaj vsaj kakšno pisno obvestilo. Poslal sem po elektronski pošti, dobil sem povratnico, da so sprejeli. Menim, da je zelo pereča in zelo težka tema in da se premalo zavedamo vsi, ki smo danes zbrani, vključno z menoj, ker sem toliko let že z računalnikom, ampak zadnje 4-5 let sem začel pa na stvari gledati precej drugače. Kako nas tržijo. In na kakšen zvit način pridejo do, bom rekel, tega zlata. Poglejte, kak imperij je v par letih Mark Zuckerberg naredil. In drugi, seveda, ki se ukvarjajo, ali pa Amazon, ali pa to. In nenehno dobivamo sporočila to, on, drug, tretji. In potem se postavi celo nad tebe in ti jemlje svobodo govora in ti določa, kaj lahko pišeš. Community standard. Kakšen community standard sem jaz podpisal leta 2015, ne vem, kdaj je Facebook prišel, koliko let je zdaj, če je to 10 let so zunija, koliko so, Poslušajte, ne gre to tako, da bo zdaj nekdo meni tukaj, ki sem živim v Sloveniji, pa imamo ustavne pravice, svobode govora, svobode izražanja, svobode mnenja, ki ga lahko širim, s tem ne delam kriminala, s tem nekoga ne pretepem, ne žalim, namreč, ker tukaj gre za objektivni vandalizem, pa za besedno zadevo. Objektivno pomeni, da nekoga do krvi stolčem, takrat sem absolutno kriv. Če pa jaz govorim iz svojega spoznanja, je pa to komunikacija, je pa to mnenje. S tem pa če nekoga užalim, to ni moja stvar, to je njegova stvar, ker je to osebno vzel, ad hominem je vzel. Danes nocoj ste me poslušali, pa me zanima, res me zanima, ker ste z nami, ker nas je danes veliko, hvala, ker ste se udeležili. Vključite mikrofon za vprašanja ali pa za kakšno idejo oziroma misel, ki ste jo dobili ob tem, ko sem jaz to podal.
Jaz sem Rozalija.
Ja?
Jaz sem opazila, da pri EMŠO, jaz imam številko 506. Bilo je pa spostavljeno samo 505, kaj pa to pomeni?
Lahko, da je bilo v tistem letu rojenih več, pa potem preseže.
Evo, tako.
Da, to je možno. To se pravi, jaz sem se z njim šel veliko ukvarjal, Imaš 500 za moškega ali pa 501, pol za žensko je 505 ali pa 506, ja. Potem so še druge anomalije in druge oznake, ampak recimo tukaj imaš v bistvu, da je v enem dnevu rojen, jaz sem bil drugi rojen. Če je rojenih 10, se potem te številke premaknejo v bolnišnici na isti dan, na isti datum.
Jaz sem rojena doma.
No, evo, ja, mogoče je pa to. Jaz sem bil v bolnišnici, imam tako, lahko pa da to pomeni, da si bila rojena doma.
Jaz sem rojena doma, ja, na naslovu.
Ja, no, tudi to je možno, da je to podatek, ker zadnja številka je pač kontrolna številka, ne vem, kako jo
zvem, ja.
Ja, da kako jo po kakem sistemu dobijo, ampak to je, gledajte, osebni podatek in nas povsod EMŠO sprašujejo. Jaz bi bil veliko bolj vesel, da me podavčni sprašuje, zato ker potem imamo takoj enakovreden odnos, ne? Se strinjate?
Zelo.
Ja. Ja, Branko, tukaj si napisal, mislil sem bolj na naše ustanove, recimo FURS, ki je povezan z banko in podobno. Iz vsake ustanove lahko napišeš pisno zahtevo, skladno z zakonom, a ne, to je mislim, da 6. člen GDPR, pa skladno z Zakonom o varstvu podatkov, lahko zahtevaš, da ti pošljejo obvestilo, kaj vse imajo o tebi. Zanimivo bi bilo mogoče, če bi vprašal, koliko davka si plačal ne vem, v 1 letu, v 2 letih, v 5 letih. Pogledaš, kaj si počel, ali pa v času, ko v službo hodiš, ne? Takrat si šel, si se zaposlil, zdaj je minil, ne vem, 20-30 let, ali pa manj, vseeno, in napišeš, da te zanima, koliko denarja si pustil, in ne samo to, kako je država ta tvoj denar uporabila. Morajo vedeti, točno morajo vedeti, kam je šel tvoj denar, kje je. Ker če nimajo računovodstva, če ne, to potem lopovščina, je to kraja. Vsak od nas bi mogel na koncu leta dobiti od davčnega urada obračun, toliko ste plačali, s plačo, z delom, toliko ste ob nakupih, toliko to. Če plačaš z gotovino, seveda, potem grejo to drugače stvari, ampak če imaš zdaj banko, kartice, dobivaš, vsaj te stvari bi mogle biti jasne. Da se približno ve, kam je šel denar, ali je šel za vrtec, za obnovo ceste, razsvetlave, kam je šel denar. Meni bi se to zdelo pošteno. To je državni družinski proračun in potem bi živeli nekako v neki drugi simbiozi. Ja, res je, premalo ljudi, ki bi se spustili v proučevanje zakonodaje. Ja, kazenski zakonik, obligacijski družbi. Toliko je, gledajte, vse to je znano, več ko je zakonov, večja je anarhija. Ker zakone delajo, tako kot zdaj ta vlada, po istem principu vlada z odloki kot prejšnja vlada. Ne moreš ti vladati z odloki, ki so tretji po vrsti dol, najprej je ustava, pa je zakon, pa so uredbe, pol šele odloki. Predsednik vlade vlada z odloki po firmah, po državnih podjetjih in to so hudne stvari, ne. Vanja pravi, mogoče bi morali združeno peljati stvari, razumeti zakone je težko in povezave med njimi. Povedal vam bom, kaj sem poslušal oni dan po internetu, sem dobil povezavo od enega gospoda, kjer je bilo rečeno, da v zadnjih 30 letih so naredili, celo 50, sistem šolstva tako, da ko izobražujejo upravne delavce, odvetnike, pravnike in druge upravne delavce, politike in tako naprej, v razmerju do klasične osnovne šole, srednje šole, poklicne šole, da je tudi takšna razlika, da se ta dva sploh ne moreta več pogovarjati. To se pravi pravna latovščina. Ta fiksna država, ta fikcija, ki je, jo ti kot človek prakse, ki delaš z zemljo, ki jo kopavaš, ki si v trgovini za tekočim trakom, kjerkoli že delavec, ko si fizično, sploh ne moreta več komunicirati. In on piše zakone za tebe, ki jih ti ne razumeš, in ker ne razumeš, časih se ne držiš in plačaš globo in še delaš za onga, ki sedi gor in tebi zakone piše. Se ima fajn, potuje v marmorni palači, ne vem, to posedeš, BMW, jahto in tako naprej in ti ga plačuješ, on te pa po glavi tolče. Tukaj bi mogli eno razmerje, sorazmerje najdeti, res eno pravično simbiozo in harmonijo. Ja. Dobro. Dajte malo povedati še kakšno stvar, če ne.
Halo?
Ja?
Živijo Borut tle.
Borut, dober večer, ne se razkuriti, umiriti besed.
Dober večer, sej drugač bi se, ker vse to, kar zgovoril, to vse je čist na glavo obrnjen. Jaz sem pa danes kao na rekovajih presenečen, sem prišel dam, me je pa v Kaselcu čakala pošta, mestna občina Kranj, prav moj ime priimk, se to ti bom tudi poslal pol na mail, da boš videl, kaj so napisali. In so napisali participirni račun mestne občine Kranj za leti 25-26, spoštovani občanke in občani, in pa so začeli nakladati, da mi lahko damo glasove, kjer stvari bojo uresničili, kaj bojo naredili za 1 250 000 evrov, da je komisija pregledala predloge in tako naprej. Mislim, da ugotoven je, bom rekel, to je že vse vnaprej določen narod, samo to vključil, da malo lepš farsa zgleda, ne. Lej, ti bom jaz tole poslal, se bo sam za glavo paril A4 format, je tudi QR koda je, po 8. oktobru lahko predlagaj.kram.si, daš te projekte, ki so gor, ne, kaj bi, bojo to videli, koliko je, za kjer projekt je, recimo, več, rekel, v narekovaju glasov občanov, ne, in na koncu Matjaž Rakovec, župan mestni, kako je to vse fino v celofan zavito, wow, kar naenkrat se je to začelo spreminjati, ne. V zadju pa to že vse določen, kva bojo, in to je samo kost občanom vržena.
Igra,
ja, dobesedna manipulacija, vse imajo že za 25-26 narejen, ampak zdaj nas kleno dajo. In to smo čisto mojim staršem, sem vprašal, ste dobili? Ja, smo dobili. Vsak dobi po imenu in priimku, dobi v poštni nabiralnik. In imajo čisto vse podatke o nam, komu morajo poslati, zakaj morajo poslati, kdo živi tukaj, kdo ne živi tukaj, kdo ima kle prijavljeno bivališče in tako naprej. Tako da, lej, dobesedno tudi to, kar si danes govoril o varstvu osebnih podatkov, tega, to je toliko enih manipulacij in teh štren, ki jih država dela proti nam, rekel, državljanom, da...
A sploh veste, zakaj je nastal zakon o varstvu osebnih podatkov?
Ja, da še bolj skoriščajo, še bolj te imajo pod nadzorom.
Zdaj vam bom povedal.
Pred trgovino te čakajo, pred Lidlom, da daj račun. No,
to je podobno, Borut,
sem ti poslal tisto knjižico, ki si jo bral, ne, koliko ima spodne hlače, koliko si težek, kaj delaš, kaj se čekuje. Vse to veš, no, vse to smo že debatirali, ne.
Vse sem poslal vsem,
Narod, ko mi čaka, da si aplikacijo naloži. A veš, ko je to fino, Boru, daj še ti, to greš kaj, pa imaš pa popust, pa beležijo se nakupi. Ja, to je vse zavedbo, drugače to vse plačaš, ampak si vse registriran, datum, ura, kdaj hodiš v trgu. Mislim, to, kad to globinsko pogledaš globalno, narod samo to, da je recimo pri nas v službi so na vse kavne avtomate naštimali te čitalce gor, antence, da lahko daš kartico gor, ti avtomatsk 5 evrov zračunan, napolnen na ključek in pol je to tako in to je vse digitalno, vse to. Kako je to fino, niti treba nositi denar. Ja, globalno poglej, kam to pele. To je tista zgodba kuhanje žabe, ne.
Ja, dobesedno.
Počasi, zdaj bomo to uvedli, da bomo parkirne avtomate uvedli na karti, da bo to vse, ko pride strčilo v kovanci, na vekam vršt, nekje, da sploh ni kovancev, recimo na parkirnih avtomatih, ne, to je že itak protizakonito, ne, na mož vsa plačilna sredstva, človek nima kartice, pri sebi ima sam gotovino, kovance, ne more plačati parkirnino, tam čara okoli avtomata, vmes pride redar, ki 150 metrov avtostran parkuje čitalca, mu že kazen gorda, da ni plačana parkirnina in tako naprej. Mislim, podan od podna, ne, se prtošno to vse vrnejo, da ne dokaže, da je bil avtomatu tam, po drugi strani so kao, da je parkirišče ves pod videonadzorom, ne, in rekel, se lahko kamere pregledate, pa boste videli, da sem tam stavil, se imate verjeten, ta cash avtomat, pa to imate tam, ne, da je pod kamero. Ja, teh posnetkov nimamo več, to se dnevno brišejo, ker je disik tak. Mislim, res brez veze, no, to je tema, no, v glavnem.
Jaz sem se ta teden ukvarjal z Bovcem oziroma z reko in s turisti, ker gor imajo velik problem, ker je ogromno turistov.
Poznam.
Ja, huda stvari. In seveda ne, kamere, tam so zdaj tudi neke špijone, je župan uvedel, pa inšpekcije, pa redarje, pa teon, pa tret, pa informatorje, pa, mislim, počakaj malo, ne. Ja, in to je po vsaki občini. Samo oni so dali...
jasno, to jaz vem, ampak ko ti hočeš rečeš, zdaj te kamere pogledati, da daš ugovor, tega pa nimamo več ni. Zakaj imate pol kamere, če varujete ljudi?
Želel sem povedati to, da oni v javnem prostoru, kot skrbniki, obnašajo se kot lastniki, pa niso, ker jih mi plačujemo, so oni skrbniki javnega prostora. In tle v Ljubljani. Enemu sodjarju so prišli 5 inšpektorjev in so mu 2 tiste štangice, ki je imel strehco narejen, človek dela 30 let, pa tisto povičko in so mu to vse, da moti javno površino, katere lastnik je občina, je pisalo v sklepu in v kazni. In potem seveda... No, na kar sem jaz na občino vprašal, gospod je imel dovoljenje iz iste občine, sam z drugega oddelka, da tiste štangice, da to ne moti javne površine, ker je vse v zraku stoji in ne moti. Pa čakaj, tudi higiensko je, če kdo pride, da golobi ne serjajo posadijo, da ptiči ne serjajo posadijo, da če prideš v dežju, če prideš, če marelo držiš se, ne moreš niti denarnice odpreti, niti sodelovati.
Točno to, itak se to vemo.
Ampak, tukaj, ker zdaj vsak centimeter Ljubljane hočejo tržno delati. Recimo, tukaj po celi Ljubljani so mize, ki jih župan trži. In kaj on trži? On trži javni prostor, ki je naš, oni so samo upravitelji. Nikogar od nas, meščanov, državljanov, ki plačujemo davke, ki plačujemo prispevke in na vsakem koraku nas tukaj plačuje, ne vpraša, ali on lahko da stojnico, ali on lahko računa, tukaj gori recimo imajo 10 mesec, zunaj 4500 evrov na let za par kvadratnih metrov pločnika, ki je javen, ki je naš, ki je javen. Ne more biti občina lastnica javnega. Javno je skupna last. Lahko so samo upravitelji. Tako. Druga stvar, ki sem jo hotel izpostaviti, pa je, če mi dovoliš, da še to povem, se spomniš, ko smo imeli pač čas cepljenja in covida, ne? Briga njih, če ni testirano, briga njih, koliko je poškodb, koliko je umrlih. Jih sploh ne zanima, ker mi smo za njih, nas nismo samo žvaliki in nam je treba čip dati, ne? Problem je v tem, ker je zaslužek tako velik, da če kršijo zakon, so kazni za njih minorne. In kršitev zakona ponavadi prinese bistveno večji dobiček, kakor je globa. In to si zračunajo podjetja, zračunajo si države in zadeva je, zakon je napisan zato, da ti prinese biznis. Nič drugega. To sem hotel povedati, isto, ko so GDPR delali, v bistvu zdaj je šele ratov biznis, ker rečejo, mi pa zdaj imamo podatke v skladu z GDPR. Policist reče, mi smo delali vse, mi smo strogo preučili in delamo vse v skladu z zakonom. Pa ga vprašaš, kateri zakon je uporabil, pa ne ve.
Seveda ne.
Ker je to fraza.
Vsak stavku je v skladu z zakonom, to je posod, to je čist posod je ta beseda, v skladu z zakonom, kjer člen, kaj, kako, zakaj so pa mrzli, ko jih predstavljaš pred dejstvo, ne. To je to.
Vanja sprašuje, ali je zakonito, da finančna inšpekcija kliče stranke na FURS, če ni izdan račun. Povedo številko registrske tablice in so klicani, sicer kaznovani, če se zlažejo. Tako je bilo pri nas z eno frizerko. Zdaj, vsak podatek, po katerem je možno identificirati posameznika, je prepovedano slikati. To se pravi, redarji sploh ne smejo slikati avta z registrsko tablico, ker ga je možno registrsko tablico povezati z osebnim podatkom. In tega ne moreš ne dopovedati, ne Jankoviču, oni to ne slišijo, ker je to za njih biznis. Oni to tržijo. Tudi policija, ko te gleda s kamero in te snema, ne sme tablice tebi slikati. Čakajte, dajmo si to razčistiti. Uradne osebe fizičnih oseb zaradi varstva osebnih podatkov in varstva osebnosti v javnem prostoru ne smejo snemati. Zdaj pa vas vprašam, ali je cesta zasebna stvar ali je javna stvar. Težko določiti, ker so privatizirali vse ceste. Ti moraš stopnino plačati. Kam plačaš vstopnino? V zasebno stvar. Če je javno dobro, ni vstopnine. A se spomnite, na Primorske nismo mogli do vode priti, so povsod vstopnine, vstop do morja, si mogel plačati, če si hotel kopati, ne vem, v Strunjanu, v Piranu, v Kopru, v Portorožu. To so potem ukinuli do javno dobro, ne? In tukaj finančna inšpekcija kliče stranke na FURS, če ni izdan račun. Ne sme v tvojem imenu brez tvojega dovoljenja, mora imeti pravno podlago. Vprašanje, kakšna je pravna podlaga, če jo ima. Tukaj bi bilo treba te primere malo bolj raziskati. To je moje osebno mnenje, ampak za vsako stvar je treba iskati namen zakonodajalca. No? Tukaj me bo mogoče lahko Borut, ne ti Borut, ampak en drug Borut popravil, ki se na te stvari spozna, ampak hočem reči, mi, ki smo fizične osebe, ko smo državljani, mi pa lahko slikamo in snemamo policista, redarja, uradne postopke, ti pa nihče ne sme prepovedati, da ti enega javnega dogodka, uradnega postopka, karkoli, ne smeš snemati. Ampak zdaj je ravno obratno. Zdaj se dogaja to, da tebi prepoveduje redar, policij, vsi ti prepovedujejo snemanje, oni pa tebe lahko čisto obrnili zadevo. To je vse narobe. Ne sme tebe v javnem prostoru kot fizično osebo nihče snemati, nihče ti ne sme slediti ali pa s tabo zalezovati te z namenom prisilnega kontakta, zato da ti odvzame družinska sredstva, da ti pride v zasebnost in te oškoduje tvojo družinski mir, psihološko stanje in škoduje otroku, družini, odnosom doma. Vse veste, kako je. Dovolj je, da en družinski član dobi neko kuverto, če so 3, 4 ali pa 5, so vsi vznemirjeni. Ker drug za drugega v družini se skrbi, ne? Tako da te stvari so šle, po moji oceni, malo predaleč. Zdaj bi pa se zahvalil tebi, seveda, Boru, za debato in bi še mogoče koga vprašal, če bi še kdo kaj želel vprašati, povedati.
Ja, jaz bi rada, Tanja.
Prosim.
Zdaj smo se o teh stvarih pogovarjali, ampak zdaj pa vidim, da nastal nov problem. Tisti, ki plačujemo obvezno zavarovanje zdravstveno, se zgodi, da gre zdravnik v pokoj in potem dobi odgovor na zdravstvenem domu, ja, to pa si morate kar sami drugega poiskati, mi vam več ne moramo nič to in tako naprej. Zdaj me zanima, kako je zdaj, če nimaš pol osebnega zdravnika, potem tudi nehaš lahko plačevati tistih 35 evrov.
Se pravi, ker ne nudijo storitve, za katero plačuješ.
Tako je. In kaj zdaj v tem primeru narediti?
To je pa nova, ja, to je pa zanimiva situacija.
To se zdaj par primerov, ni sicer še moj, ampak lahko se zgodi, da bo tudi moja zdravnica šla, ne? In tako imam tako na koncesijo, ne, v zdravstvenem domu. In sem pol, ko sem se z eno pogovarjala, ki je vsa obupana glede tega, prav, kaj pa zdaj ne naredim, nimam zdravnice, moja šla v pokoj in so mi dali takrat, pa si morate kar sami in ne vem, kaj še vse. Jaz sem rekla, ja nič, če boš pa zbolela, urgenco, te morajo vzeti.
Urgenca je ena stvar, ampak vse so stvari, ki jih izven urgence človek potrebuje, pa ne pride na vrsto.
Če ima gripo, pa za bolniško, ker je še v službi, ja, bo šla pa na urgenco, pa ne tam dajo zdravila, pa ne. Ja, se plačuje, ne?
Glejte, s pogovorom. Ja.
Mihael, dober večer.
Dober večer.
Viktorija pri telefonu.
Povej.
Pa tole gospo poslušam, jaz sem tak primer imela. Prekinili so, zdravnica je odšla, niso hoteli nič povedati, če se je v Ljubljani dogajalo, v enem od zdravstvenih domov in morala sem si sama iskati zdravnika. Noben ni nič naredil in sem napisala tudi Zavodu za zdravstveno zavarovanje. Seveda ne šmirgljajo nič, oni samo citirajo zakon. Ampak ne gospa vseeno napiše. Več nas je, več je treba napisati, ker ne gre samo za 37 evrov mesečno. Gre za celotno kvoto zavarovanja za zdravstveni primer.
Jasno.
vseh 40 let, če smo upokojeni ali pa tako naprej, ne. Tako da, naj gospa vseeno, naj ne odneha. Jaz sem napisala na več zdravstvenih domov okrog in prosila, da mi najdejo zdravnika. Vsi so seveda ne moremo, ali pa prestavljali na kasnejši čas. In isto na Zavod za zdravstveno zavarovanje. Ampak na koncu je en zdravstveni dom pa, evo, odgovoril in dobila sem, ne.
Če si vztrajen, ampak glej, saj to ni namen, če ti plačaš storitev, potem mora zdravstvena ustanova sama poiskati in te obvestiti in reči.
Absolutno.
Mislim, tle je neodgovornost, izogibanje, važno pa je, da ti prispevki laufajo, da oni to dobijo in da dobijo na podlagi, ne vem, kakšnih teh odločb, za katere nismo prosili. Prej si se obvezno ali pa neobvezno zavaroval, ampak očitno jim to ni šlo skozi, ne. Zakaj jim ni šlo skozi? Se ne ve. Ali pa se tudi ve, pa so vsi ti. Hvala, Viktorija, krčno, hvala za... Ja, no, povej.
Ne, jaz samo to hočem povedati, da kljub temu, da na nek način že vemo, da sistem bo kar tekel tak, kot je, ni odveč se javljati in zahtevati od zavoda, da uredi.
Nujno. Jaz rečem pa ne samo v tem primeru, v primeru šole, če kršijo osebne, v primeru zdravstvenega doma, v porodnišnici, če pride matičar in ne vpraša, če lahko a veste kaj, ker prva stvar je, ki dajo bolj naprej podatke policiji, socialni službi, davčnemu uradu in ne vem, statistični urad, ne vem kam še vse, v istem hipu gre vse v Evropi. To se razprši v istem. S kakšno pravico po 30. členu, nekdo, ki ima zakonito pravico, podlago, ne, zdaj si lasti matični register naše osebne in se obnaša do nas, kot da smo mi tle, kot da nas ni. Tako da bi kuro tam štempljal, pa jo dal v register, zdaj pa jaz prodajam, danes imam 50 kur, jutri imam 30, zdaj imam 2. Tako se obnašajo in s tem je treba prenehati. Lejte, dajmo se malo zbuditi, dajmo se malo povedati, ne. Tlele je nekdo napisal, da je na občino vprašal, kako je, čakaj, kje so že tlele, glede stavbnega zemljišča, sem spraševala direktorico občinske uprave, ki je prijateljica, pa se mi je smejala, seveda je vse v skladu z ustavo, je rekla. A veste kaj, za občinarje, ki uporabljajo lex specialis, to so odloki. To je najhujša stvar vladavine, kar se lahko zgodi za občane. Bi vas pa na nekaj opozoril, vse nas in vse vas, ki se ne poznamo, pa poslušate, rad bi vam povedal, čakajte, kjer je tukaj sam toliko, da boste videli razliko, pri 140. členu, tle nekje, ja, našel sem, glejte, poglavje 5 v ustavi, samouprava, ima poglavje 5, samouprava. In potem ima 2 samoupravi, to že mi vemo nekateri, ima lokalno samoupravo A in pa lokalno in pa drugo samoupravo. Poglejte, tale nova, ne, ima, samo malo drugje. In pa B, drugo samoupravo. Ja. Prva beseda pri obeh bom prebral samo prvo besedo. To se pravi, govorimo o samoupravi, lokalni samoupravi, kjer vlada župan. Prva beseda je prebivalci Slovenije. Uresničujejo lokalno samoupravo v občinah in drugih lokalnih skupnostih. Prebivalci so mačke, psi, ljudje, rastline, vse prebiva. Ribe v vodi, v reki, vse prebiva. To so prebivalci. Okay? Občina tu prevzame vse in tle nimate nobenih pravic. Pogremo pa v drugo samoupravo B. A veste, kaj je prva beseda? Državljani. V drugi samoupravi smo pa državljani, to se pravi mi z davčno številko, vse tudi unijo imajo, ampak njih ne zanima. To so prebivalci, pač prebivalci. Državljan, ki ima pa zavest, ki se združuje in ve, zakaj se združuje, lahko z uveljavljanjem svojih interesov samoupravno se združuje in piše, državljanom se lahko z zakonom prepusti samoupravno urejanje posameznih zadev iz državne pristojnosti. En člen pred drugo samoupravo, preden sem tega prebral, piše pa nadzor državnih organov. Državni organi nadzorujejo zakonitost dela organov lokalnih skupnosti. Kaj to pomeni? Da državni organi druge samouprave sploh ne morejo nadzorovati. Po nobeni teoriji, zaradi tega, ker prvič, druga samouprava ima statut in drugič, znotraj druge samouprave člani drugega nadzorujejo. In je čisto druga zgodba, ker imamo zavest, da smo državljani. Prebivalce je treba pa voditi, pa jim je treba redko obrisati, pa jih je treba kam peljati, pa jim je treba vse povedati, pa jim je treba z odloki. Zdaj problem je pa pri županu, ker misli pa, da ima vse same prebivalce. On se ne zaveda, da je neki državljanov vmes in da je ta državljan nima državnega nadzora. Da on kot župan pa ima v lokalni samoupravi nadzor, če se ga prijavi. Ti ljudje tega še niso skopirali. Ker reče, ustava je sam neki splošni akt. Kar neki. Mi imamo pa lex specialis. Veš kaj? Lex specialis po 5. odstavku 15. člena ne more čez ustavo. Ker nihče ne more reči, da je ta ustava neveljavna ali da velja v manjši meri. Toliko za nocoj.
Mikel, lahko eno vprašanje, prosim, Matej tukaj?
Lahko. Ja, lahko.
Se pravi, jaz delam v drugi samoupravi.
Ne.
In živim v drugi samoupravi.
Ne. Ne moreš. Zato, ker piše, da moraš imeti, da se lahko združuješ. Ti si pa rekel, da živim, delam.
Delamo, živimo, množimo.
No, ok, ja, s kolikimi pa upravljaš ti v drugi samoupravi, ali je ta druga samouprava samo v tvoji glavi kot konstrukt?
Ne, resnično z večjimi. Se pravi, več 100.
Ki so prav registrirani člani?
Ja.
In po statutu in delate skupaj?
Tako.
Ja, pa morate se statuta držati, svetleti nimam jaz kaj reči.
Ne, moje vprašanje je, a lahko potem policaj, fursovci in ostal meni govori, kako moram delati, ali jaz rečem, jaz imam to drugo samoupravo?
Ne, ti si vključen v obe. V obe, vsi smo v obe vključeni.
Nimam ne osebne, ne potnega lista.
Ne, glej, čakaj malo. Tle moraš ločiti. Čim prideš, čim prestopiš prag društva, pa čim si izven skupnosti, takrat se ne zaščitijo več člani, ampak se spojimo z ostalo družbo, vendar z neko drugo zavestjo. Člansko izkaznico samo pokažeš, da si član društva in potem, da si državljan, in da so določene stvari, če niso v skladu s statutom, ki jih kasneje pridejo kot tvoj statut, tako kot smo mi rekli za WHO, ker imamo mi naravno pravo, pa imamo, tako kot Iviljana ponavlja, 9. člen Iviljana. Prva alineja 10. ne? 9. člena, ona to bolj ve, kot jaz, se pravi, ker je to ta njen, ona lepo spravlja skupaj. In je potem, imamo naravno matematično logiko in naravne zakone. Ja, in tega pri WHO-ju ni, tega pri določenih stvarih ni, in če se to ne sklada, potem, razumete, je treba jasno povedati, da ni v skladu. In če je statut v skladu z ustavo in to država potrdi in mi ugotovimo, da WHO dela stvari, da jemlje suverenost, da kvari zdravje, vidiš, da okrog tebe ljudje umirajo šele po tistem, ko so cepljeni, da ni epidemija vzrok za smrt, cepljenje pa rešitev, ampak da so epidemijo naredili, cepili in da je cepivo razlog za smrti, poškodbe in ne vem česa vsega, potem rečeš hvala lepa. Ne? In tle smo mi naredili ločnico. Tako da, Matej, samo v nekih posebnih primerih ne moreš tega ti zdaj sem pa jaz to, ne? In ko daš človeku oblast, daj človeku oblast, daj človeku denar, pa boš poznal njegov karakter, njegov značaj. Ne moreš si vsega na tako enostaven način razlagati. Ne? Vseeno je treba biti tle pošten, če ustava da to možnost, potem moraš biti najprej državljan, pošten, transparenten, delaven, odgovoren, potem lahko rečeš, aha, država ga je tle polomila, opozoriš. Recimo naše društvo je opozarjalo vrtce, je opozarjalo šole, je opozarjalo predsednico države v zvezi s pravicami, s krivicami, ki smo jih bili deležni z javnim pismom. Zdaj odgovarjamo županom na zelo širokem področju, to smo prejšnji teden tudi objavili, pokazali v naših pismih. Tako da so stvari, na katere moramo biti pozorni, ampak to zdaj pa ne pomeni, da ne sodeluješ simbiozno z prebivalci, kot sem prej rekel, in državljani. Ker eni ljudje, a veš, važno jim je, da 8 ur dela, pride domov utrujen, se vleže, zjutraj vstane in gre delat. Njega druga ne zanima. Njega ne zanima ustava, ga ne zanima zakon, ne parlament, ne ljudje, ne družbeni, nič. Ne moreš se na takega človeka postavljati, jaz imam pa zdaj neomejeno odgovornost, jaz sem pa zdaj predsednik društva, jaz bom pa zdaj to. To je neodgovorno, ne. Kar se ustanov tiče, so pa drugače šolani ljudje. Državna uprava ne pozna ustave. Ustavo poznajo samo ustavni sodniki, vrhovno sodišče in določeni sodniki, tik preden, če se toliko časa pritožuješ, so določeni sodniki, ki imajo znanje iz ustavnega prava, lih toliko razumeš, da lahko krivico popravi, ko se ti že toliko časa in toliko let in toliko glasno pritožuješ. Vsi ostali, za vse ostale je ustava, kot da je ni. Za vse ostale je zakon, za vse ostale so uredbe, za vse ostale so občinski odloki, drugi predpisi, še celo hišni red postavlja predsednica državnega zbora mislim, dajmo si malo razčistiti, ne. Ja, lex specialis, ne, nikoli zapomnite si, ne more ječi človekovo pravico, če oni ravno tako mislijo, da pa zdaj z lex specialis ti lahko pa povozi vsak detaljček in te ne more, ne sme, razen če mi to dovolimo. Toliko nocoj z moje strani, da ne bomo predolgi, čaka nas še zelo zanimiv film.
Hvala.
Hvala, Mihael, še jaz, Miha, se javljam po dolgem cajtu, kmalu se te obiščem, pa kakšno več na to temo rečeva. Hvala še enkrat za tvoj čas, da si vse tole združil. Večina od nas nima časa, da bi se to poglabljala, tako da res hvala ti srca od vseh, tudi tistih, ki jih ni tukaj.
Srčna hvala za to tvojo opasko, jaz sem v to dal enormno energije, da sem to dal skupaj, da sem to poslal, sem na to pozabil in sem rekel, kaj bi pa v torek imel tematiko? In sem rekel, ja, bom pa jaz to odprl, ker gre za javno stvar. Vsi se veselimo rojstva, ko pride nov otrok, prinese novo življenje in takoj ga udarijo, označijo, takoj dobiš tempelj, kot bom rekel, ena žival, ki se na kmetiji rodi in mora že imeti čip, mora imeti ne vem kaj. To sploh ni več naravno. Narava ima pač svoje principe in ko človeška roka poseže v gozd, kaj se zgodi, ga uniči. Namesto, da bi v simbiozi s tem živeli z naravo. In tako se mi zdi to nečloveško, ponižujoče, kaj ne rečem. No, se boš prišel, pa bo še kakšno rekla, mi je všeč. Hvala, Miha, srčna hvala.
Mihael, v nabiralnik poglej.
Ne morem zdajle, ker sem
pol.
Ja, srčna hvala, no. Že naprej zahvaljujem.
Vse v redu. Uživaj.
Okay. Ja, hvala lepa. Hvala. Dobro, če ste za to, naredimo 5 minut pauzice, potem pa seveda tale naš film, ki bo zanimiv. Rdeča pilula. Ja? Halo?
Lili tukaj.
Ja, prosim, povej.
Tle sem napisala, ne, da vsi zdravniki ljubljanskih zdravstvenih domov imajo 10% presežke pacientov, zato po upokojitvi zdravnice ne morem dobiti zdravnika. Se pravi, veliko ljudi je v takem položaju kot jaz, ne more dobiti pač zdravnika, ne. Tle nisem mogla napisati 10% presežke, ker mi nagaja tipkovnica, zato sem se oglasila. Drugače pa bom že nekako uredila to zadevo. Hvala.
Ja, hvala tebi, vidim tukaj, ja. To, kakor si napisala, Lili, vidim, 10 do 5 presežke, ja. Ja, hvala vsem za lepa sporočila, za lepe besede. Prav bi bilo, da bi bilo v Sloveniji več takih stvari in da bi bilo manj praznega govorenja, ne? ker je veliko govorjenja, veliko praznega govorjenja. Mene sploh ne zanima, kaj se dogaja trenutno okrog. Imam občutek, vem, me boli srce, ampak to ni prioriteta. Doma pa padamo v luknjo, ne. Najprej si razčistimo doma, kako imamo stvari urejene. Šele, ko imaš urejen dom, urejeno hišo, potem lahko malo čez pokukaš. Zdaj sem si uredil, zdaj pa šel še pogled, kako je drugje urejen. Ne pa drugje kaos dela, doma pa je še hujši kaos kot drugje, če glih ni videti. Zlata mašljica še ne pove, kakšen drek je v škatli. Dobro. Hvala lepa.
Mihael.
Hvala lepa, ja, hvala. Jaz bom zdaj izključil mikrofon, vam se bom zahvalil. Torej, če bi kdo hotel naprej gledati, imamo na YouTubeu tudi live in bo čez 3, 4 ali pa 5 minut se film začel. Uspelo se nam je live na YouTube pripeti, vse ostalo so blokirali, tako da bomo tle na Zoomu pa na YouTubeu, če lahko pošerate karkoli, če bi kdo želel gledati ta film, jaz sem ga s pomočjo umetne inteligence prevedel, bolj kakšna, ampak glejte celotno vsebino, kaj sporoča film, in sicer rdeča tabletka. Potovanje feministke, ene ženske, ki je bila zagrizena feministka, je šla v gibanje za pravice moških. Enakost še nikoli ni bila bolj kontroverzna. In rdeča tabletka prikazuje potovanje režiserke, to je režiserka ženska, po skrivnostnem in polarizujočem gibanju za pravice moških je prišla v to moško gibanje in pravi, da je raziskovala današnjo vojno med spoloma in postavlja vprašanja, kakšna je prihodnost, enakost med spoloma, če smo že zdaj na bojni nogi. Pravi feministka, ki je prišla med moško sredo, ki se bori za moškost, zato ker ženske povsod prevzemajo oblast. Ženske, zdaj, če pogledate v državni zbor, si videl moške v kravati in so razpravljali. Zdaj pa tega ni več. Zdaj pa, če so 3-4 moški tamle za tisto mizo, ko gledate TV3 Slovenija prenose pa hitre postopke, so same ženske. Razpravljajo. In stanje je takšno, kot je zdaj po teh letih. Zaradi enakosti. 2019 smo sprejeli zakon o enakosti moških in žensk, zaradi socialnih programov, da ni razlik. Kako ni razlik? Vsak dan so večje. Ta zakon je sam pesek v oči. Tako da ti zakoni, ko jih po hitrem postopku in potem popravke, amandmaje delajo, to res je velik problem. Družben problem. In več, ko je zakonov, slabša je situacija, ker ne moreš vseh spoštovati. Hvala tudi vam. Zdajle je ura, a smo bili toliko časa skupaj? Ja, to je zanimivo, no. Ok, rečemo od 10 pa kakšno minutko čez bo jaz pripravil film, pa ga bom pognal. Hvala lepa.
Have you ever been through something and you don't know what just happened, but you know it was important to go through? This is that journey for me.
Misogynist rantings would be at home in the far-reaching internet subculture widely described as the men's rights movement, a toxic distillation of the worst aspects of American sexism. It's a universe of message boards where men get together to express their hatred towards women.
I thought men's have all the advantages in the world these days.
That's utter nonsense. Men are routinely ground up in a family court system that is misandrist and biased against them. They are the majority of the homeless. They are the majority of suicides. They are the majority of the drug addicted. They are the majority of the unemployed. They are the majority of school dropouts. They are a majority of those in prison.
How do we know that they're not the cause of these problems?
There's a reason that women live longer, Mark. Let me tell you. It is because we are stronger and we are happier at the end of the day than most men. And that is factual, and you know it.
And when men are married to women who scream like you, they just want to die sooner. When you have
A voice for men, an online hub for men's rights activists, and they were founded by a man named Paul Elam.
It's a website called A Voice for Men that's run by a man named Paul Elam, which is male spelled backwards, but it is his real name, apparently.
It's a gathering of women haters.
The Southern Poverty Law Center has classified that group and men's rights groups as hate groups.
He wrote a piece declaring the month of October to be Bash a Violent Bitch Month. I mean, literally to grab them by the hair and smack their face against the wall, he wrote.
You may be wondering why I'm sitting in a car with notorious men's rights activist Paul Elam. That's a valid question. And to answer it, I need to start at the beginning of how I became a feminist. I was a quiet kid preferring to observe from afar. My mom put me in theater classes when I was 8 years old to break me out of my shell, and I loved it. So much, to the point that I decided to move to Hollywood when I was 18 years old to become an actress. What I wasn't prepared for was to be pigeonholed as the blonde who always died. Billy? Granted, I had a good scream. But the characters I played weren't alone in feeling objectified. I was commonly harassed on the streets, hit on by married producers, told by photographers to come back when I lost 15 pounds and got a boob job, and a plethora of other uncomfortable experiences, all while still being a teenager. I started to realize my role in the world seemed a little too similar to the unfortunate roles I was auditioning for, and it was not how I saw myself or the person that I wanted to be. So, I quit acting and bought a video camera to tell the stories I wanted to tell. And now, I've been making documentary films since 2008 when I was 21 years old. Most of my work has been about women's issues and sexuality. I've covered a range of topics from the phenomenon of purity balls to reproductive rights, single motherhood, and LGBT rights. After releasing my film in 2012 about marriage equality, I was at a loss of what topic to explore next. And that's when two horrific stories broke the news.
two-star high school football players in Steubenville, Ohio, have been found guilty of raping a West Virginia teenager.
The video shows the former Steubenville student callously joking about the incident.
That's like rape. It is rape.
Bro,
they raped her.
You know you do it? Bro.
They raped her.
This is the funniest thing I've ever seen.
They raped her.
Outrage across India as a 23-year-old woman, the victim of one of the most horrific rapes India has ever heard of.
A 90-minute horror for a 23-year-old medicine student on this bus. Gang raped and beaten. Her friend assaulted and thrown out of the bus.
Every day, every woman is facing violence on the streets.
I started to research this rape culture. A website called A Voice for Men popped up. Paul Elam wrote about how women long to live out their rape fantasies, to be taken by a man she's never spoken to, let alone given consent to. As I read, I was asking myself, is this the rape apologist that I've been hearing about? The victim blamer who perpetuates rape culture? I continued to read A Voice for Men's website, often stopping around the halfway mark in every article because I could only read so many bitch, fuck, feminazi, and rape-tard words per minute. But even still, I kept reading, and thinking, and reading some more. I was trying to understand how these, what I perceived to be women haters, could have so many followers. So, I decided to meet these MRAs. The ones leading the movement, and some of their followers too. And this begins my journey down the rabbit hole.
This, ladies and gentlemen, is an historic moment. Never before has there been a gathering of this magnitude to support men's and boys' issues. We have got serious problems. I have been working in this area advocating for the rights of and here we go.
What you'll hear is that we hate women. You'll hear that it's a backlash against women's rights. You'll hear that we're regressives that want women back in the kitchen and making sandwiches and barefoot and pregnant.
You're just bitter, you're a loser, you're a whiner, you're ugly, you're undesirable, you're lazy, you're scary, you must be a racist, you must be a misogynist.
When we do speak out, women often don't want to hear what we have to say. And so then we're called names, we're called whiners.
And this is the way people who don't want men to talk about issues try to shut us up.
We all know that you guys are a fascist, Nazi front group of white supremacists. No other way to openly organize other than calling yourselves a men's rights group. We're somehow disempowered because we're white men. Maybe it's just because you're pathetic.
We're here to fight how misogynistic assholes think they have the right to oppress women. White men are starting to feel misplaced because women are sharing space. It's disgusting, and scroll the fuck up, and don't confuse suffrage with oppression. Everyone suffers, it's universal. I am a man, and I need feminism.
And it is crystal clear that the problems for men and boys are real. I would like to turn the microphone over to Paul Elam of A Voice for Men for some words.
This is a historic day. I've never seen a gathering like this out of concern for the general state of affairs for men and boys in this culture. And as
Trying to articulate the entire platform of the men's rights movement is kind of like trying to understand a snowdrift one snowflake at a time. It's a very, very complicated matter. Just consider this, that 93% of workplace fatalities are men. 4 of 5 suicides are men. Men are dropping out of higher education at very alarming rates. We're down to 38% now of college students are men, and it's dropping rapidly.
Male suicide, male abuse, male unemployment, male homelessness, male failure in education, male health issues.
We've got the paternity fraud issue, the wrongful paternity issue, a false allegation issue.
Men are sentenced to 63% more prison time for the same crime as women.
They're less likely to see a doctor. They're less likely to have health insurance.
The family court system truly is biased against men. I mean, there's just no question about it.
It's really the pro-choice for women only movement, because men, they're denying men any kind of choice once a child is conceived.
Her body, her choice, right? Think about men. His body, his choice, not so much.
Because the U.S. government does not want to send you to die. They would rather send me to die.
Young men that are failing to launch, they're staying in their homes of origin far past the time that we would normally expect them to individuate and move out and go live their lives. We have video game addiction, we have pornography addiction, we have the abuse of young boys with drugs like Ritalin to manage their behavior.
Almost all victims of autism spectrum disorders are boys. Boys are most likely to be homeless, most likely to get cancer, most likely to die young and of every major cause, most likely to be arrested, prosecuted, imprisoned, and even executed while being completely innocent.
It doesn't matter what their race is, it doesn't matter what their ethnicity is, it doesn't matter what their religious or non-religious views are, it doesn't matter if they're gay or straight. Men and boys are in crisis, and they need your help and they need your support, because they are human beings too. And you will not shame me or anybody here into silence about it anymore.
But if you start to talk about those issues and address them in terms of how they affect men and boys as a group, people get hostile about it. The idea is that men have all the rights, they've always had the power. But if that's true, why can't men talk about their problems? And that's what really got me interested in this to begin with.
Shortly after I began filming men's rights activists, I realized my own views were being challenged. I kept a video diary throughout filming, and I've decided to share some of those diaries with you. I really do feel like learning about the men's movement and their specific issues, the issues that they have issue with, it's hard for me to completely understand them and just automatically feel welcome in that space of talking about these issues, because at least with feminism, whenever I heard about the issues that feminists were fighting against, I always felt like I had something to draw from and experience to be on board with that. And that's always been why I've been drawn to the feminist movement, is because a lot of what they spoke about I had personal experiences with, and with the men's movement I have very little personal experiences with the issues that they talk about.
A cab driver who was driving a cab 70 hours a week was not saying, I am earning this money to have power over my wife. He was earning this money even though it took power away from his life. He was doing that so his child wouldn't have to drive that cab. The garbage collector does not get up at 3 or 4 in the morning in rain and sleet and snow and get out to do the garbage so he can have more power over his wife. That's power he's losing over his life in order to make his contribution, his sacrifice, his way of loving. And this has been translated into the culture of, you make more money than women do, you must therefore have more power.
Meet Warren Farrell, best-selling author and self-styled social anthropologist, leading an assault on our traditional thinking about men.
I asked my girlfriend at the time to buy me as a gift, I think it was for Christmas or for my birthday, Warren Farrell's book, The Myth of Male Power, which she did. And it just changed my whole life.
And his premise was, while women are often seen as sex objects, men are often seen as success objects. And this resonated with me.
He wrote this book that questioned our notions of power, of who had power and where it was. And it questioned the roles of men, but not the way feminists had always questioned gender roles.
Every society that survived based on its ability to train its sons to be disposable. Disposable in war as warriors, disposable in work as firefighters, as workers on oil rigs and so on, coal miners, and indirectly, therefore, disposable as dads.
What happens in men's life when they're raised that they're worthless unless they're a provider, that they must work, even if they have to take on extremely dangerous work, they must get this done or they're useless as men? That is very, very powerful stuff.
See, feminism did see accurately that we value male work more than we value female work. But there's also the issue that we value female life more than we value male life. Even when that plane went down in New York City a few years ago, and that, the pilot was a hero for the way he landed it and saved everybody.
Word arrived over the citywide fire frequency that a commercial jetliner was in the water with 155 people on board. Then, over the next few minutes, the doors opened, life vests were inflated, and women and children first, everyone got off that plane.
They saved all the women first. That's still, when I went on a cruise, there's still women into the lifeboats first, because not because you're a man, so you should be able to swim halfway across the ocean, but because you're a man, you're expendable.
We have to look at not just the glass ceilings, but also the glass cellars. And Paul, I think as you were saying, we have to look at men just not only as human doings, but also as human beings. When you survive because somebody else is willing to die, like in war, then that you are immune to the pain of the people who are dying because you have an investment in their being willing to die. You say, I will build a statue, I will remember you in a history book. But if you look at that from another perspective, that building of the statue or remembering you in a history book is a bribe to be willing to die so that I can live. But both sexes, in the area where they are rejected, tend to turn what rejects them into an object. So the area where men...
I'm watching this lecture that Warren Farrell's giving in the 90s. I see some women in the crowd, and a lot of them have their hands folded, and there is a little bit of uncomfortableness by being a woman in a crowd of people while the speaker's talking about how men are oppressed and women have it so great. It kind of puts you on the defensive as a woman. And understanding that I feel that way makes me wonder, are men having their arms crossed, listening to a feminist speaker talk about how men have all the power and women are oppressed? Are men feeling like, what are you talking about? I don't have power and we have it pretty shitty on this side of the grass too? In 2012, Dr. Warren Farrell was speaking on behalf of men's issues at the University of Toronto in Canada. A feminist group protested the event.
Be fucking ashamed of yourself. You're fucking scum. You are fucking scum. Fucking rape apologist, incest supporting, woman hating, fucking scum.
Is there someone else I can wait? Does someone follow me?
Fucking scum. Yeah, just another.
I just want to listen to someone else's opinion. I'm not even on a side here. I just listen to as many people as I can.
You know what though? Why would you pay money to fucking support a fucking rape apologist if you weren't fucking one?
I never heard him say anything that was.
Well, it's fucking scum.
Who do you serve? Who do you protect? Who do you serve? Who do you protect?
You're fucking scum. Fuck you.
Raise your side of me. All cops are bastards. ACAB.
Real fucking
This is what men's rights look like. 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 This is what men's rights look like.
Hi, how are you?
I'm Cassie.
You're Cassie. Oh, for some reason I thought you were a male, which I'm just delighted that you're a female.
Well, thank you.
Very glad to meet you.
Yeah, you too.
Come on in.
Thank you.
Thank you.
But Farrell wasn't always so attentive to men. In fact, for years he focused almost exclusively on women's issues, rubbing shoulders with feminist leaders like Gloria Steinem. And he's still a card-carrying member of the National Organization for Women.
I believe that women cannot hear what men do not say.
And he's got a lot to say to both men and women in his provocative new book, The Myth of Male Power.
I was making a very significant amount of money speaking around the world on behalf of women's issues alone. I went through a period of forming men's groups. And then when I listened to them, I thought, well, gee, this will be really helpful to present to audiences so that they can understand not only women's side, but men's side too, because I was really totally in the feminist camp. And immediately I saw my standing ovations drop. I started hearing that there was people saying, you know, don't invite him there, you know, to speak with us. And pretty soon I had, you know, very few college and university speaking engagements.
How did you originally get involved with feminism? Where did that all begin?
I was doing my doctorate in political science at NYU in the late 60s, and the women's movement surfaced. And I started to say, this is the most exciting thing I've ever heard, because I'd heard of civil rights, gay rights, But suddenly, women were saying, I don't want to be confined to just being a homemaker or a secretary. And so it's like, why shouldn't women be encouraged to do everything they possibly can do? And at that point in time, I saw a lot of women marrying men that they weren't completely in love with, but the man earned a fair amount. And so I thought, that's just a form of prostitution extended over a lifetime. How depressed that must make a woman. And it's not going to be good for a man either. He never knows whether he's loved for who he is or loved for what he has. And he's afraid to give up producing because he's afraid to lose love. And so women who were successful to me appeared to be women who would free men from having to be all, wrapped up in just being the only breadwinner and supporting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people, which, it's one thing to support yourself. When you're supporting 5 people, you don't have the freedom to question your boss because you're supporting 5 people.
The first issue of feminism was to say, just because I'm a woman, maybe I don't want to spend my life raising children. Don't force me into that role against my will. So they looked at men and said, well, you're not forced to raise children, you don't have any issue. But for men, the traditional sex role was not raising children. For us, the traditional sex role was to be a provider, a protector, and to initiate relationships. Each of us has traditional sex roles. Don't force us to carry out those traditional sex roles.
We have the same rules set up for men that they've always lived by, that you need to protect and provide at any cost. But we've changed everything where it concerns women. They now have access to everything men have always had access to education, to work, to whatever they want to do. But they're not the ones driving the semis. And they're not the ones in the coal mines. You don't hear the National Organization for Women complaining that there is just not enough female ditch diggers. It is still men carrying the lion's share for what it takes to operate and maintain this society. And it is still the expectation that if somebody's going to go down with the ship, it's going to be men.
Flexibility in roles is where we should be all headed. Any men's rights activist that I would support the portions of the women's movement that is encouraging women to have more flexibility in roles.
So where do the men's movement and feminism disagree?
Well, only on the fundamental belief that the women's movement says men are the oppressors, that we are involved in a patriarchal world in which men invented the rules to benefit men at the expense of women.
But don't we live in a patriarchy? When most of the world's nations still have never had a female leader. And less than 5% of CEOs of Fortune 500 companies are women.
You have to look at this in a larger perspective. Patriarchy is the result of gender roles and not the vice versa.
Traditionally, women's power and responsibility has been in the reproductive sphere, while men's power and responsibility was in the productive sphere. You have to reproduce to continue the species, and you have to produce to feed people so that they can reproduce. So, it's like they work together.
And most cultures divvied up roles because women were responsible for childbirth and were more likely to breastfeed. They're not more likely to, they did the breastfeeding. They tended to be involved in the role of raising children. Men tended to be involved in the role of raising money or making a killing of the animals or making a killing on Wall Street. But those were our obligations.
So that's why industry was male-dominated and government was male-dominated, because that was our job.
And so what we call patriarchy is men giving into the expected roles that they're supposed to give into, and many of those roles are very harmful. Working exceptionally long hours, difficult hours, dangerous jobs, getting killed on the job. Even politics, a lot of people describe as masochism.
Imagine what it takes to be a successful politician. Imagine how much of your personal life that you give up, how much you work, how much privacy that you sacrifice, how much freedom in your day-to-day life that goes out the window. There are more men willing to do those things than there are women.
But also, just because men are the ones, for instance, writing the laws in general, doesn't mean that the laws are protecting men.
You hear about patriarchy, right? All the evils of the world's from patriarchy, but we're the ones dying, you know? And we die for you guys, you know, to protect our families, our friends.
In every society that's ever existed, women have had privilege and protection that men did not.
For example, we never hear about how men were excluded from the Forced Labor Convention of 1930 for years. The Forced Labor Convention was an international treaty that banned slavery and forced servitude, but it made an exception for able-bodied males ages 18 to 45. Eventually, they got rid of that, but there was still an exemption for prisoners and military, which is 90% male.
Stop pretending that you're oppressed and men are your oppressors. It's a lie, and it's a hurtful lie, and it's a hateful lie, and it's wrong.
You talk a lot about the red pill in A Voice for Men. What is the red pill?
Oh, it's sort of a cultural slogan. It comes from the movie The Matrix, where the character Neo is given the choice between a red pill and a blue pill.
You take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
And if he swallows the red pill, the scales will be peeled back from his eyes. He will see everything that he hasn't been able to see. And if he takes the blue pill, he'll just go back to sleep and live in his sort of unaware, semi-comatose state forever and probably be a lot happier. It's a pretty apt analogy.
So what is the blue pill in this world?
Well, the blue pill is the paradigm that most people live by, that men have all the power, that they've always had all the power, that domestic violence is a problem that's committed by men against women only, that sexual assaults are only committed by men against women, that women don't make the same money for the same work as men. Teach men not to rape. Only men can stop rape. Men commit domestic violence. We need to stop violence against women instead of just stopping violence. That is feminist training.
The MRAs say that we live in a blue pill world where women are victims, men are perpetrators, and it's all a lie. And that we're brainwashed to believe this, and that it's not true, and that men are slaves in this world, and women are... I don't think women are necessarily the puppet masters, but I think they're saying that women have the easy way out, and men are, they're given medals and statues and written in the history books to justify them dying and being slaves to work or being used to progress societies. And I've believed for so long that I'm at a disadvantage for being a woman, and that I have to work harder than everyone else, and I have more to overcome, and I have more to prove just because of my gender. But the MRAs are saying that this is all a lie, and that guys are actually the ones that are disadvantaged and discriminated against. And actually, the more I learn from him, the more I think thank God I wasn't born a guy. Because I don't think that the expectations on men is good or healthy. I mean, they have so much pressure to succeed and to be strong and to stand up and protect others and to put their lives on the line. I don't think I would want that responsibility. But, you know, 50 years ago, no, I wouldn't have wanted to be a woman. But now, I mean, maybe just it's right now that the tides are changing and women are have the better deal. Well, no, I don't know. And then sometimes I think the MRAs are just duping me and giving such a strong pitch about what they believe in to convince me of something that's actually just some out there theory that men are discriminated against and women have the advantage.
Yes, this is Cassie J. It's regarding a documentary about the men's rights movement, and we're looking for feminist voices now to speak in the documentary.
Feminist majority. Yeah, hold on just 1 second.
So I realized, okay, I need to bring some feminists into the mix, make sure that we have that side spoken for. I was researching rape culture, and so that's how I stumbled across a website called voiceformen.com. So some of the people that we've already interviewed on the MRA side is Paul Elam with A Voice for Men.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with him?
Oh, I'm familiar with them. I've never met them.
Yeah.
Obviously, they've spent a significant amount of time and energy denouncing me, so I figured I might as well have a look at what they say.
Yeah, really, the men's rights movement is part of the backlash.
The backlash?
To feminism. The men's rights movement really got going as women began to make gains, and some men have felt threatened by the opportunities that have been opened up to women. And I don't know if it's because some of them feel threatened that they now have to compete with a lot more people for their jobs. They now can't get into the best schools if a woman or a girl has better grades. Think about it. Grandfather's generation probably had it pretty well, right? All of his needs, his shirts were ironed, all of that was always taken care of. Well, you know, grow up. Realize the world has changed. And as much as the MRAs would like things to go back to the way they were, and use the argument that women have an advantage now, no person looking at the data can possibly say women have an advantage. We're just beginning to get a level playing field here. It's not tilted in our favor, I can tell you that. And they know it. They know it. But it's the constant distortion of the data. It's the spinning of a situation to make it look like women are somehow getting ahead, getting an advantage they don't deserve. It's part of the backlash.
Political organizing comes from a feeling of victimization, which is why the men's rights movement makes that claim that men are the victims of discrimination. But it doesn't have much traction because, you know, you look around and it's hard to see it. We don't have movements called, you know, straight liberation. You know, the question I would pose rhetorically is the men's rights movement really the gender version of the white nationalist movement? Because there are plenty of white people who say that they are the victims of reverse discrimination. So of course it's not going to have very much traction. You can't really organize the people who are superordinate.
So do you think that men are being discriminated against in any way?
Not under the law. Men are not disadvantaged under our laws. Or in the business world, as a class, men are not underrepresented on corporate boards or at the top of the Fortune 1000 companies.
In the corporate world, in the business world, in a lot of parts of academia, in the military, in the sports world, still pretty much a male-dominated world, and where a lot of the privileges and power and status accrue to men.
Men are advantaged over women, no question. No one can debate that, not with a serious, not in any seriousness.
I was a math major as an undergraduate, and one of the fundamental things about geometry is the distance from point A to point B equals the distance from point B to point A. And if women are so different from men that men can't understand the female experience, we need to listen to women to describe it, then the male experience is so different from the female experience that you can't understand it. You need to listen to us. You can't really compare how men and women have suffered from sexism. Because there's no way to quantify, that kind of suffering. So if a woman says, well, I miss 30% of my income, more than you miss 6 years of life, there's no way to quantify that. Or I've lost a job opportunity because I'm a woman. There's no way to say, well, I've suffered more than you because you've lost a kid because you're a man. We can't, but it's serious. It is serious. And at least if you're denied a job because you're a woman, at least you can go to another company and apply for a job, But you can't, when you lose your kid, like you can't say, well, okay, I'll get custody of that kid, I'll try for that one. It's a terrible thing that happens. There was a case, the Serpico case. You might be too young to know the movie Serpico with Al Pacino. It was about a New York City undercover cop. He gets shot at the end of the movie and retires from the police force. And he was a real man, Frank Serpico. A woman after the movie, after this was made, decided she wanted to become a single mother and tricked him into fathering a child. And the court accepted that because she told her friends she was going to trick him, and they testified, and the court said, yes, you were tricked into it, and still awarded her over 90% of his police pension. So everything that he goes through in this movie to including getting shot to earn his pension, she won by sleeping with him one night. My son's mom wanted to have children with me, and I had always refused, saying, you have this anger problem, you need to get counseling, I'm not going to consider having children with you until that's dealt with, because she would lose her temper almost every day and just use any weapon she could, and like a child's the perfect weapon. So I was really definite about that. But she also used to proofread my articles for me. And I wrote an article for Playboy about Serpico. And when she read that, she told her friend she's going to trick me into fathering the child. She doesn't need my permission. And so that's how my son was conceived. Then she said, if you want to see your son, you have to stay in a relationship with me. But if you break up with me, I know all the things that a woman can do to a man. She's read all my articles. She saw my talk shows. She said, I know all the things a woman can do to a man, and I'll do them to you. So that's what I had to deal with. Like everything that I had been raising awareness about for the previous 17 years, then she combined into one thing for me to live through. It's really ironic. For the first 5 to 7 years, I guess, we would see each other 4 times a day for exchanges. On average, every single day, I had to deal with some scene. A scene meaning she would just not show up, or she would hold the kid out and then pull him back and hold him out and pull him and just kind of play with me. Or she'd let me have the kid and then she'd stand in front of the car so I couldn't move.
You stay in Mommy Town tomorrow. You stay in Mommy Town for a couple of days, 2 days, and then you come back to Daddyville.
Another time I saw her hold him by the shoulders and say, Daddy is a bad man. Daddy is a very bad man. And so he had to go through this long custody battle, and the decisions that they would make, you would just go, wow, there couldn't be any explanation. You know, either they're absolute idiots or it's biased. There's just no other explanation for it. One of the things, his mom is obese and wanted him to be obese for various reasons. One thing is so he would identify more with her side of the family than mine, because we're all thin. Another was so that he would enjoy being with her more, because when he was at my house, he had to get activity, you know, and eat well-balanced meals and get his sleep and stuff. And at her house, they would bake brownies and stay up late and just watch TV. And so where would you, if you're a little kid, you know, where would you enjoy being more? But he self-reported to the mediator how upset he was about being obese, that the worst thing in school was when kids called him fatty, and how he cried. And his physician said that he's really concerned medically. And then what I did, he was at an age where he would imitate things that I would do. You know, I gave him a broken shaver, so when I shaved, he would pretend to shave. And what I did was I started weighing myself every morning and writing down my weight, the date and the weight. And I taught him how to read a scale. So he kept his own records. So I had 6 months worth of statistics to show consistently that every time he was with his mom for a few days, he'd come back weighing 3 or 4 pounds more, and then he'd lose it while he was with me. So they had, you know, that how much he was upset about the problem. They had his physician being upset about the problem, and they had the proof of where the problem lay. So the judge's decision was that father should no longer be allowed to weigh the child. Problem solved. After 14 years, my body gave out. I got sicker than I've ever been. I realized I'm going to die. That's not going to do anybody good. I've got to give up the fight. And so I gave up custody. And so I don't see my son anymore. He hasn't been in my house since. So I did lose him.
Just like a dream. You're like a guiding light shining in the night.
Fred claims that during his 14-year custody battle, he spent the equivalent of 5 years of his gross income on legal fees, mediators, and child support payments.
I was really in his life a lot longer than most fathers would have been. It's something most fathers can't afford.
You are so beautiful to me.
We generally know that fathers don't get as good a deal in family court, and we don't really complain about it until it happens to us. And even then, a lot of men don't.
Many men's rights activists come into being men's rights activists as a result of getting a divorce, wanting to be equally involved with the children, and realizing that women have the right to children and men have to fight for children.
When your family courts run on the supposition that mothers are more fit to be custodial parents and that fathers are more fit to provide a check every month and to become what we like to call Uncle Daddy, where they visit their children. To me, that's one of the greatest obscenities in the world, the idea of visiting your own children, where you get to see them for 2 hours on Wednesday night, and you get to have them for X amount of hours every other weekend, and you have no say in how they're brought up.
You know, I can't tell you how many men have been in this office, in that chair, in tears because they can't see their kids. some of this stuff ends up in horrific consequences. Like this gentleman here, that's his little son. They found him dead. Not the son, but the young man. In the desert with a bullet in his head. Day before the family court, where it became known that he was going to get to see his little guy even less. And of course, he'd been falsely accused one time after another. It had destroyed his life. It had bankrupted him. It had driven him into debt. It had caused him to miss work. He was about ready to lose his job. He was in the end of his rope, so he just decided to end it.
The unfairness in the family courts, the unfairness in the way child support is so often structured, it's commonplace and it's everywhere. And the more you start to become conscious of it, the more you realize that it's there.
I started to research some fathers' rights issues and came across some harrowing stories. Like this man in South Carolina who found out his only daughter was adopted away by the mother without his knowledge or consent.
His daughter was with an adoptive family in California, so he began his fight to get his daughter back.
Adoption is for children without families, not children with a willing and capable family.
And this man in Colorado who lost his daughter when the mother left the state to give birth in Utah, where he wouldn't have legal rights to his child. He fought for 4 years in court and finally won visitation rights. Only visitation.
I can't explain the emotion, the happiness. There's this hard fight and what this means to me.
And then there's this heartbreaking story.
The 20-year-old father never left her side until he was forced to give her to adoptive parents this week after Kaylee's mother decided to put her up for adoption. In order to keep Kaylee, Colby needed to file paternity action, an affidavit, and a commencement notice with Utah's Vital Records a day before the mother signed the adoption papers relinquishing her rights. But in Colby's case, the mother only gave him a few hours' notice of what she was going to do.
I would like her back. Men in the men's movement are not upset about having to be fathers. They're upset because they're not allowed to be fathers.
That guy blows his head out, blows his brains out at the family court. And people don't think there's something wrong with that? And we just open the doors tomorrow for business as usual, and that's okay?
I've always thought of feminism as being the fight for gender equality. And yet, I've never heard about fathers' rights and the injustices going on in family court. Why is this? I decided to ask gender studies professor Michael Mesner.
Well, I'll just say I don't think it's, I don't think that a lot of their assumptions are correct to start with. There's no doubt that there have been some men who get just screwed by court decisions and custody cases. But I think when you look at the broader patterns, you know, it's still the case that in intact heterosexual families with kids, women are still doing the vast majority of the housework and childcare, and there's a lot of sort of father absence, lack of participation by fathers, some of whom I think then after divorce happens end up suddenly wanting equality, you know, as fathers when they haven't really been participating equally as fathers before. So to me, it always kind of swings back to the feminist perspective of how we need to push for full equality across the board, including before divorces. And if we have that, then we might expect more symmetry after divorce is happening.
The more I researched fathers' rights, the more I realized how deep this rabbit hole goes. Not only in the amount of issues, but also in the vast array of perspectives on these issues. I decided to create a flowchart of what I thought fathers' options might be following a surprise pregnancy. I then put a green line for the paths that I thought would be good turnouts for the father, and I put red lines for the paths that seemed to not be good for the father. Then I created a flowchart for women's options, and did the same with green and red lines. And as I stepped back, I saw all the red lines for the women's options if she does not want the child. But something dawned on me. Of every path the biological father could go down, he's at the mercy of the woman's sole discretion. Although women have very difficult choices to make, she at least has the choice. But for biological fathers, they have no say over their parental destiny. This is my friend Dara. She's 8 months pregnant with her first child, and she's a lifelong feminist.
It seems from MRIs, from what I've read, that women seem to have more reproductive rights than men do. I don't know what to say, like, we carry children, they're never gonna carry children. It's just a different thing. So I guess, as much as possible, take the steps to prevent yourself being in that situation. It's just, I don't know what to say. There's no, there's nothing like a woman, you know, women have been blamed for, and still are, for, you know, unwanted pregnancies, choosing to have an abortion, not choosing to have an abortion, choosing to put their child up for adoption, when, you know, the burden lies on a single mother. If the man leaves, there's real, you know, societally, she's lambasted. So there's a lot of things that women deal with in that regard that men don't actually deal with. So I can have compassion for their situation, but I don't know that it's gonna change in the way they want it to, because it's biology, you know?
So if you're going to be having sex that could result in pregnancy, and you haven't had this conversation with the woman that you're having sex with, you better have it. You better have it fast. That's when the man has the ability to make decisions, either not to engage in sex or to use condoms and to use other forms of contraception. So that's where his role comes in. Once he's impregnated her, she's the one now faced with continuing a pregnancy, faced with the health risks that accompany pregnancy. So his rights have to be exercised early. But once she's pregnant, all decisions must be hers, because ultimately she is the most impacted. There's just no question. And she ultimately has the responsibility for that child.
So before we were married, he promised me we would have 2 kids, and now he doesn't want any more. My friends think I should trick him and stop taking my birth control.
Men have never been in control of our bodies. We're the ones in control. Clap if you think that she should trick him. My people. Up next, everybody.
So it sounds like men's reproductive rights are limited to the choice of whether or not to have sex and the choice of whether or not to use protection. But what if he's tricked into fatherhood? Or what if he's not even the father?
What does paternity fraud look like?
It's ugly. It's extraordinarily ugly. And we have to distinguish between paternity fraud and wrongful paternity.
What's the difference?
Wrongful paternity can be innocent. Okay, we went to a party. I had sex with 6 guys. I think it was when I was hanging out the window I got pregnant, but I wasn't sure. But, you know, if anybody knows that guy's name, would you please have him call me? And then she names one of the other guys, and he didn't have sex with her. It wasn't malicious. It wasn't intentional. She wasn't trying to harm anybody. She was just trying to figure out who it was. Wrongful paternity. More often, and less facetiously. Okay, I'm married, I had an affair. Obviously here, there's all sorts of problems because there are more victims than the person who's named as dear old dad, who may be the wrong one. There's everybody involved in the family, like a situation in Texas where the family had 5 little towhead kids, all guys, all little blondos. And all of a sudden, one day, one of the little blondo kids gets in trouble, has to go to the hospital. They can't get a hold of mom. They get a hold of dad. Dad rushes to the hospital. Needs to give blood. Whoops. Can't do it. Wrong blood. What? All the kids look alike. Turns out it was the guy down the street.
You've heard of this case?
No, it's a real case. So what happens to this family? Can you fathom what happens to this family? How do you think the kids feel when they find out their old dad isn't their old dad and it's the guy down the street? How do you think dad feels? That these 5 little boys that he still loves dearly, when he finds out they're not his bio children, but he still can't tear away because he loves them. He's devoted himself to these. How do you think it feels? I mean, it's horrific. Horrific. That's not wrongful, that's deliberate.
So that's paternity fraud.
That's paternity fraud.
She knew who the father was and lied about it.
Paul was right when he said, trying to understand the men's rights movement is like trying to understand a snowdrift, one snowflake at a time. There are unique fathers' rights issues that vary between unmarried, married, and divorced dads. But there are also men's rights issues for non-biological fathers. Like this man who is facing jail time for failure to pay child support for a child that DNA tests prove isn't his.
Carnell Alexander still owes more than $30,000 to the state for a child that's not his because the mom wrote his name down because she needed to name someone in order to get welfare benefits.
And I had to put him down as the father. That was the only way I can get the system.
I'm almost homeless. I'm almost in jail. I'm out of work. My money is being threatened to be taken.
He says the law needs to be changed, so when this happens, as it often does, other men don't become dad by default.
A lot of times people wonder about MRIs, why are you guys so angry? And my answer to that is, why aren't you? How can anybody look at this and not be angered by it? And the only answer to that I've ever been able to come up with is that people aren't angry because they don't see men as human beings.
I continued traveling North America, meeting MRAs from all walks of life, hearing their personal stories, their red pill moments. I met a young man who was sexually abused when he was 16 years old while living at a residential home for people with developmental disabilities.
She's the only woman I've done anything ever with, partly because it just messed me up so much.
She continues working there.
She hit me in the face. She actually hit me throughout the house, chasing me throughout the house. When I reported my domestic assault to the police officers, I did not at all bring up the fact that I was sexually assaulted, because if he wasn't going to believe that I was a victim of domestic violence, there was no way he was going to believe that I was going to be a victim of sexual assault.
I met the honey badgers, women who are men's rights advocates.
And then there was a 15-year-old boy, there was a 35-year-old woman, and then later on she came out of jail and she was able to collect child support from this boy that she raped.
Yeah.
After getting out of jail. So there's lack of fairness for men in the court systems. When police officers would show up to a domestic violence case, there was often men were just taken away without asking what even happened. It's just presumed that men are the criminals.
I was assaulted several times, you know, and I never got any help. I went to the police still bleeding a couple of times. And one police officer said, I'll never forget this. He said, if she starts hitting you again, you better get out of there fast, because if she just breaks a fingernail trying to hit you, we'll arrest you.
I mean, I can't tell you at this point how many guys I've talked to who are like, yeah, you know, she stabbed me and they put me in jail. Not only are there endless studies that show women are just as violent as men are, when I would talk about it, invariably, men would start coming out of the woodwork with stories. Stories they were afraid to tell, stories that they got laughed at for, stories that they got blamed for. It's hideous.
This is not flattering to men, to talk about men's vulnerabilities. No. To talk about the ways that they are not strong and that they are, well, weak. And to be honest about it, it's not flattering. A solution for both genders is that we need to be able to recognize how men are vulnerable, and we need to be able to recognize how women are actors. Because we have a huge blind spot, especially when women do bad things.
My best friend that I grew up with since kindergarten was being physically abused by his wife, who he'd been married to for 20 years. She'll break glass and throw it at him, punch him. I've seen it just happen spontaneously, and it was frequent. And he's bigger than her, but he didn't want to hit her. And he didn't want the children, they had 3 minor children, he didn't want them seeing this at all. So he would usually just go outside because there would be glass breaking or things being smashed or yelling, and he knew that the neighbors might think it's him. So he would go outside so the neighbors can see what's happening. Eventually I said, look, you need professional help, and so does she, and maybe the kids do too. So I called a bunch of domestic violence shelters. I just looked around online and I called, but every place that I called said, we don't help men. We don't help male men at all. And I started becoming curious about why that was, because I learned that these were state-funded shelters. And I know that men pay at least half of the taxes that fund these shelters if they're state-funded, and I just was wondering why. So basically, there was no place to take him, and it just continued. The problem just kept going.
In the United States, there are over 2,000 domestic violence shelters. All of them serve female victims, and nearly all of them turn away male victims. In fact, as of 2016, there's only a single domestic violence shelter for men. My initial reaction was that there needed to be thousands more women's shelters because that many more women are being battered. But as it turns out, 1 in 3 women and 1 in 4 men will be victims of physical violence by an intimate partner in their lifetime. Sure, there's a slight majority of female victims, but how can that excuse denying men help? Couldn't this be considered gender discrimination? Think of it this way. Roughly 78% of all suicides are men. If suicide prevention services only served men, wouldn't we see the gender discrimination immediately? If there are over 2,000 women's shelters that turn away men, and only 1 shelter for men, obviously the resources don't match the need.
How are you involved in the men's rights movement?
Well, from the very beginning, when I first opened the Refuge, which was in 1971 in Chiswick in London, almost as soon as I took the women in, I got a house for men.
A Voice for Men's editor-at-large, Erin Pizzey, founded the first ever women's shelter in 1971, and she is widely revered in the men's rights community.
Because you see, what I knew from the beginning, most domestic violence is consensual. Both are involved. Sometimes one's the perpetrator, the other plays the victim, then it crosses over. It's not as though it's just all men or all women. It's both, and occasionally innocent victims, very innocent.
Battered children grow up to batter, that's what I learnt, whether it be a man or a woman. And I now know that if a woman comes in with a history of violence in her own childhood, the chances are she will be probably violent to her children, and she will want to live on this knife edge of crisis and danger.
I haven't been allowed to speak, that's the difficulty.
Why is that?
Because I'm completely barred from all conferences. I'm not allowed to walk up the step of my own refuge. I bought the bloody building. But no, because there's feminists, the woman who runs it is a very heavy feminist. She won't have anything to do with me.
What did you say that made them hate you?
That women could be equally as violent as men. That was from the beginning.
Erin Pizzi says that 62 of the first 100 women to enter her refuge were just as violent as the men they left, and violent towards their children.
But there's levels of violence, isn't there? I do not affect that I'm violent. Well, I'm violent. So much. You know, I'm very violent. Well, verbally, and you know, I could quite easily hit somebody. You know, very, very easily. And I've had an argument.
But the feminists I've met have an entirely different take on domestic violence.
On the whole issue of domestic violence, that's just another word, really. It's a cleanup word about wife beating, because that's really what it is, or dating violence. And it's not girls that are beating up on boys, it's boys that are beating up on girls and using violence to intimidate and to control. And we have very few what's called domestic violence shelters, which are places that women can leave their home with their children and get a new start, get out of the violence. But there are not nearly enough of them. We need more funding and more resources, because it is a tremendous disadvantage for women and girls.
In 2014, the CDC released a report revealing that over 5.4 million men and 4.7 million women had been victims of intimate partner physical violence within the previous 12 months. But then why does the media paint domestic violence as a women's issue?
The World Health Organization says 1 in 3 women are abused by their partner.
1 in 3 American women experiences domestic violence or stalking at some point in her life.
And when it was addressed as a men's issue, the speaker's point was that it's a men's issue because men are the problem.
I'm going to share with you a paradigm-shifting perspective on the issues of gender violence. I don't see these as women's issues that some good men help out with. In fact, I'm going to argue that these are men's issues. Why is domestic violence still a big problem in the United States and all over the world? What's going on? Why do so many men abuse physically, emotionally, and verbally and other ways the women and girls and the men and boys that they claim to love? What's going on with men?
Let's grant every single empirical case as being true. Yes, it is true. Let's just say, I mean, it is not true, but let's just assume that there is gender symmetry in domestic violence, that women hit men as much as men hit women. If I were to say that, I would say, and therefore we need boatloads more funding for domestic violence, to develop shelters and adequate interventions, because there's this hidden epidemic of men who are being beaten up by women. Or I could say, as the men's rights movement do, therefore we shouldn't have these shelters and we shouldn't fund them because the women are all lying. Well, it seems to me that if you really believe in gender symmetry, it's not that you want to, you're not questioning the number of women, you're just saying the number of men in society. You would want to join with women who are anti-violence to say, we have a real problem here. You know, it's not even a gender problem. It's a problem of women hitting men and men hitting women. We've got to get boatloads more funding. Let's work together. That seems the logical response to this. But instead they're saying it's like a zero-sum game. If we fund the women, then we're going to ignore the men. Well, we're not going to ignore the women because we all agree that the levels are as high as we say.
But it does sound like a zero-sum game when only women are receiving services in domestic violence situations. And of all the men's rights activists I've met, none of them question the number of female victims, but they are calling attention to the high number of male victims that are being dismissed. So why aren't men's rights activists and feminists working together? Michael Kimmel briefly said something that made me wonder. He said it would no longer be a gender problem if both men and women were equally victims of domestic violence. Is that why the number of male victims are never addressed?
To me, it's been fraud for all these years. Why is it we have this enormously powerful feminist movement and virtually nothing for men? Originally, it was capitalism was the big enemy in the 60s and 70s. And it was the radical feminists in America. They moved the goalposts. They said, no, it's no longer capitalism is the enemy. The enemy is patriarchy. All men. And that's how the women's movement began. And it was enormously successful. The new mood in the refuges was going to be that no men could work in refuges and can't today. They can't sit on the boards. And boys over 9 or possibly 12 can't go into refuges, or you call them shelters. Their mothers have to make other arrangements for them, which I find shocking. And it ring-fenced money. I think that that particular time when the feminist movement were desperate for funding because they'd run out of publicity, and they were desperate for funding and they needed a just cause. And unfortunately, it fell into their laps. It's an enormous industry. I mean, violence against women, they get something like, well, it's $1 billion and over a year. And an awful lot of that goes on really supposedly rehabilitating men, but essentially punishing them with something that's called the Duluth model.
Duluth Power and Control Wheel, you guys know about that?
No.
I'll give you a copy. In 1977, I think, a bunch of crazy women up in Duluth, Minnesota figured out they had the solution to domestic violence, and it was all about patriarchy and all about men. And it's the Duluth Power and Control Wheel, because men are all about power and control. Of course, not you ladies. You guys, you don't control anything. You have no power. You're just sweet and innocent little things. Okay. So when this power and control wheel is divided up in all these things, you know, about who does this and who does that and blah, blah, blah. Of course, it's all men. The entire domestic violence industry was founded on that. I think it's still 37 or 32 states in the United States that by law they have to use the Duluth model for battery intervention programs, and it's all shame, blame, and guilt-driven. If you're a man and you walk in, you must admit you did it up front or you're in denial. There's no debate, there's no discussion, there's no possibility that you could be falsely accused. The criminal justice system could have made a mistake. None whatsoever. You are in a state of denial, and you will complete that course or you're going to go to jail. You will be re-engineered.
It's frightening.
Frightening?
Yes, that's frightening.
I think it's terrifying. Absolutely terrifying.
All I had to do, a simple choice. I could just say, yes, you're right. Men are the enemy. No problem. But I couldn't. I absolutely couldn't.
Just getting overwhelmed. Because I don't know where I'm headed with what I believe and what is right and what is wrong and who is wrong and who is right, and the truth is somewhere in the middle, and that's why I'm feeling frustrated, because I don't know where the truth is, and I don't know
When I decided to make a film on the men's rights movement, I never anticipated questioning my feminist views. But the more MRAs I met, the more I felt compelled to remind myself why I was a feminist. I signed up for a women's group.
Welcome to our Women on Your Power workshop. Only 4% of the Fortune 500 companies are led by women. Women only hold about 14% of corporate executive positions and less than 20% of our governmental positions.
I made video diaries complaining about how I had to change what I wore to walk alone at night, how much time it took me to get ready for work, all the housekeeping that was on my shoulders. In comparison to other gender issues, these videos seem trivial, but I made them nonetheless. I attended women's rights rallies.
No to violence. That's what we are here for, to say no more to violence anymore.
States of America.
We are struggling for a uniting word, but the good news is that we have a uniting movement. It is called He for She.
Whenever I hear the MRA's point of view about how difficult it is for them, I immediately go to, well, what about us? What is it like for us? And then I get on the defensive and want to make sure that issues now neglects the other, and I guess that's what MRAs have been dealing with, is always hearing about women's issues and feeling like their issues are neglected. But whenever I hear them talk about men's issues, I feel like I need to stand up for women and say this is what we're dealing with, an equal opposite. I met with men's rights activist Karen Strawn late one night in a noisy bar. She became well known for her YouTube videos talking about male disposability and other men's rights issues. And she's a honey badger.
Part of what I do and what I research and what I think about is the reason psychologically why feminism seems to be such a comfortable, warm blanket emotionally for so many people, men and women alike. And it's so comfortable that it will make them not see things that are right in front of their face. Look at Boko Haram.
Hundreds of young girls, fast asleep in their beds, are awakened by the sound of gunfire. Armed attackers have stormed their boarding school and set fire to dozens of buildings. Nearly 300 of them are dragged from their dorm, loaded onto trucks, and carried away deep into the forest.
From New York to London rallied yesterday demanding that the terrorist group Boko Haram bring back our girls. It just gets to the core of you,
This unconscionable act was committed by a terrorist group
determined to keep these girls from getting an education. And what happened in Nigeria was not an isolated incident. It is a story we see every day as girls around the world risk their lives to pursue their ambitions.
I mean, you must have heard about all of that, right? That's being spun as a fundamentalist Islamic group that is so determined to be misogynistic and oppress girls that they want to deny girls an education. But they are not against girls being educated. They're against anybody getting a Western, secular, or Christian education. The initial attacks, and there were several of them, there were over 100 men killed and 1 woman killed. And the victims were described as people, right, or villagers. And in the previous attacks on the schools, they actually let the girls go. They separated out the boys and girls, and they let the girls go, and they told them, go home, get married, renounce your sins, and live a righteous life under Allah, right? And then they burned the boys alive. There was literally no outrage, right? It was barely reported on. It was one of those things, there was no opinion pieces on it, no nothing, right? Until the girls were kidnapped. And look at it this way, because we played right into their hands, because they want attention, right? And they weren't getting any attention from the Western media when they were just slaughtering boys, right? They want attention. And what do? They kidnap girls and sell them into marriage or slavery, right? And everybody, the UN, Michelle Obama, Barack Obama, the UK government, the Canadian Federal Minister of Defense, right? They're all promising aid and help and equipment and personnel to help find these girls and bring them back, because this is such an outrage and oh my goodness, something needs to be done. Well, maybe if, like last year, maybe if we did something then, all of these girls would be safe in their dorms right now, right? But we didn't. And the reason why they kidnapped those girls is because we didn't do anything. We didn't pay attention. And they want attention, right? And they know that attacking girls or women is going to get them attention. What are we going to do? Start a campaign, bring back our boys. Oh wait, they're dead. Never mind, right? The men, the people in Boko Haram, they're chivalrous. If those girls were boys, they wouldn't be getting education. They'd be dead. They wouldn't be sold into slavery with the hope of escape. They'd be dead.
Boko Haram has been fighting for Islamic rule in Nigeria since 2002. Its members have killed hundreds of people.
At least 69 dead, although some reports put the number at about 150 and scores more injured.
For that day when we shall lay down our burdens and study war no more. Finally, brethren, after a while, the battle will be over. For that day when we shall lay down our burdens and study war no more. Finally, brethren, after a while, the battle will be over. For that day when we shall lay down our burdens and study war no more. Finally, brethren, after a while, the battle will be over. For that day when we shall lay down our burdens and study war no more. Finally, brethren, after a while, the battle will be over.
one of the most important things the men's movement is doing is being able to say, men need compassion, and men deserve compassion. And to have that happen, I'm not expecting it in my lifetime.
It's an ocean of pain out there. This stuff we're talking about has been going on for so long. And nobody listens, nobody cares.
It's one thing when you look at what happens to women and you feel normal, healthy outrage about it, and that should happen. But when you can look at what's happening in our courts to men, in our medical establishment to men, in our schools to men, and yet we remain so cerebral about all of it. Yes, well, that is certainly something to consider. If it were happening to any other group, we would be having protests from coast to coast. And the fact is that it is happening to men every day, right in front of our eyes, and people will get angry at you if you try to talk about it. That's how deep the prejudice runs.
But there have been protests, not with the intention of shining light on men's issues, but rather with the goal of silencing any discussion of men's issues. Like at Ottawa University, when Professor Janice Fiamengo attempted to give a lecture that questioned the feminist narrative.
So you think this is a victory? Yeah, why are you so frightened of hearing an opinion different from your own?
Then there was the first international conference on men's issues in Michigan, where even Ms. Magazine urged its readers to protest the conference in hopes of shutting it down. But perhaps the most well-known protest of a pro-men's rights event happened in April 2013 at the University of Toronto, when the Canadian Association for Equality hosted a discussion titled From Misogyny and Misandry to Intersexual Dialogue.
About in my 20s, when I went to Columbia to study art history, and that was in '68, and that was the height of the academy. And so suddenly I was confronted with the direct possibility of being drafted for that. And I discussed that with
a feminist group protesting the event illegally pulled the fire alarm and successfully shut down the event. Once outside the lecture hall, feminist protesters and men's rights activists got to speak face to face.
So, number one, shut the fuck up for a second. Feminists do not want you to lose custody of your children. The assumption that women are naturally better caregivers is part of patriarchy. Feminists do not like commercials in which bumbling dads mess up the laundry and competent wives have to bustle in and fix it. The assumption that women... This is a list of the things that we're working towards. Now, if you would shut the fuck up for the 50th billionth time,
we agree on,
these are things that we're agreeing on. And these are things that you've actually all got skewed fucking views on. You think that feminists are trying to take away your fucking rights, but as a matter of fact, what we're trying to do is we're actually trying to work on the same things that you're working on, but except the fact that you're just too busy hating women. You can't fucking see that we're trying to work on those same situations.
Are you conflating feminism, which is an ideology, with women, which is a demographic of societies?
Okay, Mr. Derailing for Dummies. Okay.
You're still a hate
An
group.
ideology. Yes. I also hate a lot of other isms.
So you admit, though,
racism, sexism.
Oh, bullshit. You hate sexism, but you're an MRA. Okay, no, point taken. We win.
You obviously have
Sorry.
read our literature.
Okay.
You don't actually work on anything. You're not creating any change in the fucking world. Your website, your fucking website's a hate website against feminists. You're not actually creating any change.
Feminists do not want you to have to make alimony payments. Alimony is set up to combat the fact that women have been historically expected to prioritize domestic duties over professional goals, thus minimizing their earning potential if their traditional marriages end. The assumption... I'm reading, fuckface. I'm trying to I'm letting everybody else hear it, okay? It's not just for you, Mr. Entitled. The assumption that wives should...
Why do you think the men's rights movement is at odds with feminism? What has created that clash and that war between each other?
Well, one, feminism has spent the last 50 years demonizing men, which is sort of one of the problems. Feminist scholars have characterized men as inherently violent, inherently bad, inherently predatory, inherently oppressive. They have postulated that masculinity is a disease.
Feminists aren't the only problem. The problems didn't start with feminism. So when I start criticizing feminism, I want you to know you're just part of the problem. They're just part of the problem. You calling men oppressors and women oppressed demonizes men, and I believe diminishes women at the same time. It's a way of telling men to shut up. It's a way of telling men that their experiences don't matter. You tell a man he's privileged, therefore anything he's gone through or anything he has to say doesn't matter. His lived experiences don't matter because he's privileged.
So, how old were you when you started calling yourself a feminist? Or how many years ago?
It was probably about 3 years ago, I guess you can say. I'm relatively new. Yeah, but I'm pretty loud, so silence only helps the oppressor, not the oppressed.
A lot of MRAs say that feminism doesn't fight for the rights of men. What would you say to that?
Cry me a river. Really, because feminism is a movement about the discrepancies when it comes to women's equality, because we're still not there yet. You know, so don't even start with that whole, oh, but you don't think about the men's issue. Well, then, you know what? Start your own goddamn movement, which they have, but maybe make it a little more about legitimate issues like custody and alimony and things that you think are unequal, which all stem from patriarchy, not from, oh my God, feminists are trying to take away our kids. No, dipshit. That's not what we're trying to do. We're not trying to do that. I mean, if they look at the root causes of why, for example, you know, women get custody more often than men do, women are supposed to be the mothers. They're supposed to be the natural born caregivers. So obviously, duh, you has a vagina, so obviously you're going to be able to take care of the kitties. That's really what it is. It all stems from sexism against women.
It's just the oppression dialectic needs to go.
It's so hard to convince people to look at men's rights activism and support it without first allowing them to at least escape the stranglehold that feminism has on their minds. I do believe it is dogma. It's zealotry.
There are good people in the feminist movement. There are not good people in the radical feminist movement. That system is based on hate. And hate is, in my opinion, hate's the most destructive force in the world.
They're so quick to call us man-haters or misandrists. Misandry for life. No, like they're so quick to say that when all we're doing is talking about like patriarchal societies and structures that we want to dismantle. Nothing against men in particular, but just saying, hey, this is a system that we live in, and this puts men above women, and it's not necessarily their fault, but hey, recognize what's happening here, and let's work together to dismantle it.
The omnipotent, ever-present patriarchy, the invisible force that directs all of our lives, right, and causes all oppression and all suffering, right, our devil. And the beautiful, wonderful force for justice, feminism, the way,
It's the way. It sounds like religion. It sounds like religion.
And oh my goodness, for a movement that's only about equality and isn't blaming of men. They name the force for evil
after men and the force for justice after women. And this being a movement
is very, very, very concerned about the implications of language. So concerned that if you call a firefighter a fireman, it will discourage little girls from aspiring to be firefighters. And sometimes discourage grown women from aspiring to be firefighters, right? By calling them firemen. But we can call the force for all oppression, we can call that essentially men, patriarchy, right? And we can call the force for good and justice women. And that kind of language, that has no implications. We're not blaming men.
We just named everything bad after them.
They're really angry, and they're angry at women, they're angry at feminist women, but yes, men have gotten a crappy deal. But it's not the fault of women or gay people.
When feminism says that they have no part in any of this, I think they're not being honest about it. I don't blame feminism for all of it, but I think they've had a role in it. They've written laws that discriminate against men. They fought to protect those laws, particularly in domestic violence areas. And for many, many years, second wave feminism would go through the statutes and change everything that was gender specific to something gender neutral, unless it was something that benefited women, like the domestic violence laws. They didn't change those. Other types of areas like fathers in prison, there's statutes that specifically give mothers certain benefits that fathers in prison don't have. And I challenged that as well legally, but we didn't win on that one.
When I wanted to get a commission on men, like the county has a commission on women, the feminists fought that tooth and nail. When Prop 209 was before the California voters, which was to end affirmative action, every feminist organization opposed it.
Every time men's rights groups try to pass joint custody legislation, feminist groups fight them. They fought us on paternity fraud.
The biggest opposition that I have faced has been from the radical feminists that said, we don't want truth to be the standard, because if we did, they wouldn't oppose automatic DNA testing at birth. And in countries like France, they're saying, well, DNA should mean do not ask. Because it's now illegal to even get a test, and if you get a test without the mother's permission, you will be criminally prosecuted.
In Sweden, they tried to create a man tax. In India, the men's rights movement is trying to get the rape laws to include male victims, and the feminist groups apparently are fighting that. I'm not saying all feminists are this way, but I think the ones who are affecting public policy, who have the lobbying power, I think they are.
If you just look at their actions, they don't want equality for women. They want special privileges for women and girls. And even though they know in a lot of areas men do not have equality, they are silent.
The commandant of the Marine Corps said that he thinks, and I quote, all eligible and qualified men and women should register for the draft, talking about selective service. Do you think women should also have to register for selective service like men?
I have to think about whether I think it's necessary to go as far as our military officers are recommending. The idea of having everybody register concerns me a little bit unless we have a better idea of where that's going to come out. Where I want people to register, I want every young person to register at the age of 18 to be able to vote automatically. And I think if
what's the motivation? People don't ask, what's the motivation? Do we need a men's rights movement? No, we need common sense. You know, but if there's going to be this women's movement, and this is the movement that's going to do all these things, then maybe we need a counterbalance. They call it a men's rights movement or a men's movement. But I hate to see either one of them. I think it's a shame. I think it's destructive.
I'm hearing what the men's rights activists are saying, and I'm finding the sources to support what they're saying. Men are just as likely to be victims of intimate partner physical violence. Men have little to no control over their parental destiny, especially when he's tricked into fatherhood or he's raising a child that he later finds out isn't his. The sentencing disparity between men and women is 6 times larger than the sentencing disparity between blacks and whites. So while a black man may be sentenced to 10% more prison time for the same crime as a white man, a man is sentenced to over 60% more prison time than a woman arrested for the same crime. Boys are falling behind in education. They are enrolling at lower rates and earning less college degrees. And while not all MRAs agree on the issue of infant male circumcision, most MRAs do believe it is a human rights violation. I spent months learning about infant male circumcision, but it only took me watching a 5-minute medical training video to convince me this is a barbaric practice that needs to stop.
Okay, so first thing, make sure he's well restrained. So the foreskin, okay? And we repeat the process with just one end and clamp. Anything that gets clamped gets cut.
All that was left, a partial penis and his tiny testicles. Rhodes says Ashton urinates through a hole in his penis. She says she can't imagine now what she'll say to her son when he's old enough to understand what's happened to him.
How could you explain it to your child that you don't have a penis or you might never be able to have kids?
Yes, men are the majority of workplace deaths and injuries, war deaths, suicides. They have a shorter life expectancy. Warren Farrell makes the argument that prostate cancer and breast cancer mortality rates are similar, but funding disproportionately supports breast cancer research and awareness over prostate cancer.
The red pill is about looking at these issues in an honest way, even when it's uncomfortable. And these things are uncomfortable, but without the willingness to set aside the programming and to set aside the false beliefs about what power is and what women are and who women are. Part of what we do is a pretty serious critique of both sexes. It's brutal, but critiquing the sexes is a real valuable thing. Feminists don't want you to do it though, unless you're portraying women as victim and men as perpetrator. The red pill is about understanding that men and women, like everything else in life, it's a mixed bag. You've got victims and perpetrators on both sides of the fence. And that's all. It's real simple. It's just not easy.
I think I agree with everything you said, but there's still some kind of unsettling doubt, and I don't know where that's coming from.
I'm recognizing all of these very serious men's rights issues. But what I don't understand is how I could be agreeing with men's rights activists. Is this the same misogynist hate group I originally discovered online?
The Southern Poverty Law Center has classified that group and men's rights groups as hate groups.
I looked into what I was hearing from feminists and the mass media about the men's rights movement.
I've read a lot and I've heard a lot that the men's rights movement has been labeled a hate group by the Southern Poverty Law Center. Is that correct?
That's not quite true. No, they got it wrong. No, this was somehow written up on some kind of anti-men's rights websites as us having listed them as hate groups and so on. That we didn't do.
He wrote a piece declaring the month of October to be Bash a Violent Bitch Month.
Jesus.
I mean literally to grab them by the hair and smack their face against the wall, he wrote.
I then discovered that Paul Elam's famous Bash a Violent Bitch article was written in response to this article by Jezebel called, "Have You Ever Beat Up a Boyfriend? 'Cause, we have." The article cited a study that revealed 70% of non-reciprocated violence was perpetuated by women. The author then went on to say that she conducted an informal survey at the office, and the gist of her findings was that many women had physically assaulted their man, and it was interpreted as either being funny or he was asking for it. I couldn't help but see the hypocrisy in a major feminist website making light of abusing men, and MRAs stinging back only to have the media paint them as the abusers.
Something else to think about. Arriving on campus, boys will also see the effects of women's studies programs, now usually termed gender studies programs. Make no mistake about it, however, they are still women's studies programs. I teach in the gender studies program at Wagner. There are about 900 such programs worldwide, and about 400 of them are in the States. By comparison to those 900 programs worldwide, there is one men's studies program. In 4 years, Center for Men and Masculinities is to be established at a state of New York university, the one at Stony Brook. It will be headed by Professor Michael Kimmel, a sociologist. Its advisors will include, probably among the advisors are funders as well, the actress and fitness expert Jane Fonda, Gloria Steinem, and Eve Ensler, the author of China Monologues.
After my year of filming men's rights activists and feminists, my descent into the rabbit hole was not slowing down. My education on gender politics was really just beginning. I learned about other sectors of the online manosphere, like MGTOW, Men Going Their Own Way, and a forum on Reddit called The Red Pill, which is separate from the men's rights community and they do not see eye to eye. I'm told an easy way to remember the difference is that while MRAs want to change the system, Reddit's The Red Pill want to take advantage of the system, and MGTOW want to leave the system. There are so many perspectives on gender, and I believe they are all worthy of listening to. However, the conversation is being silenced. For a society to accept anything said on behalf of women's rights, and then to shame any dialogue about men's rights and call it hate speech is precisely the problem. I don't know where I'm headed, but I know what I left behind. I no longer call myself a feminist.
Up. It's never what it is. Wisdom is asking what. There is another side, down where the rabbit lives. My world will blow your mind. Just have a look at it. Think about it. Think about it. Think about it. Think about it. Don't gotta change your mind, just try to open open it. I'll let you use my eyes, see what I'm dealing with. People with different stories, divided by different categories and reasons why. The smart speak, the wise they listen.